Good evening, everyone. Time being 5:30, I will open the meeting. My name is Paula Reid. I'm the Mayor of Kingborough, and it's my pleasure to welcome everybody here tonight to the Council meeting on Monday, the 16th of August 2021. Welcome to all of those in the public gallery and also to anyone who is watching from home via YouTube. I now officially declare the meeting open. I wish to advise that council meetings are recorded and made publicly available on our website, and in accordance with council's policy, I will ask the Acting General Manager to confirm that the audio recording has commenced.
We are rolling.
Thank you. I wish to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land and pay respect to elders past and present, and acknowledge today's Tasmanian Aboriginal community. Attendees this evening, myself, Councillor Reid, Deputy Mayor, Councillor Westwood, Councillor Bastone, Councillor Fox, Councillor Gladewright, Councillor Midgley, Councillor Street and Councillor Wass. We also have with us from the staff, we have the Acting General Manager, Mr Smee, Chief Financial Officer, Mr Breen, Director of Environment Development and Community Services, Dr Katrina Stevenson, Manager Development Services, Ms Tasha Tyler-Moore, Compliance Coordinator, Mr Scott Basham, Media and Communications Advisor, Ms Sam Adams, and Executive Assistant, Mrs Amanda Morton. We have apologies this evening from Councillor David Grace. And we also have congratulations this evening to Councillor Christian Street, who got engaged. And he will never forgive me for that, but congratulations to you and to Francis, importantly. Now, given just before we start, as I emailed councillors this afternoon, because we have such a substantial agenda, we will take a meal break around between 7 and 7:15, depending on where we are in the agenda, for about 15 minutes or so. We'll try and keep it as short as we can, but I think we're going to need a bit of sustenance to get through everything tonight. So we will aim for that. We move now on page 1 to the confirmation of minutes. Could I have a mover? Thank you, Councillor Fox, seconded Councillor Bastone. And the motion is that the minutes of the open session of the council meeting number 15 held on the 2nd of August 2021 and the special council meeting number 16 held on the 11th of August 2021 be confirmed as a true record. All those in favour? Against? Motion is carried unanimously. Workshops held since the last council meeting. There was a workshop on the 9th of August with the Department of State Growth. Moving to page 2, declarations of interest. Does any councillor have an interest they would like to declare? No, thank you very much. Transfer of agenda items. Is there any item on the agenda that a councillor would like to transfer from open into closed session?
Not from open into closed. Can I request to move 14.1 until after the break sometime?
Why?
Because I might be withdrawing it, depending on... I've got an alternative amendment to move in either 17.1 or as an alternative motion to 14.1, but I just need everybody to have a chance to have thought about it, so I'd like to push it back.
My understanding, and Mr Smee might correct me, but it was my understanding that you can't just replace a notice of motion that you have submitted on notice, that's why it's called a notice of motion, with an entirely different one. Yeah,
that's right. So the advice that I've received from Mr Smee is that the cleanest way to do what I'm attempting to do is by simply amending 17.1, but there are people around the table who haven't had a chance to... They've got an alternative motion sitting in front of them, and I'd just like them to be able to read it and understand what we're doing.
Sure. Okay, that's fine. We will. So you're not withdrawing your notice at this stage?
Not at this stage, but I anticipate
that
once everybody understands it, I anticipate that I will withdraw it.
I suspect we're not going to be anywhere near that by the break, but it's good to anticipate. So we'll make a note of that. Thank you. That takes us to questions without notice from the public. Is there anybody...
Mayor, can we go back? I've had my light on for quite a while.
I beg your pardon. I'm sorry. Councillor
This is transfer of agenda items, and I wish to transfer from closed session to open session number item 22, because this item does not relate to a personal nature.
page is that on? I'll just take some advice from the Acting General Manager. Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'm advised that you are correct. It doesn't relate to a matter that is of a personal nature, so we can
So I'll so move that.
Transfer that into open session. So that will go
That
in
will happen.
as item number,
Last item, I assume.
yeah, whatever the last item number is.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you. Questions without notice from the public. Are there any members of the public gallery? Thank you. If you'd like to come up, hopefully that's turned on for you. And if you could just state, even though we know who you are, if you could just state your name and address at the start for the tape.
Sure. Rosalie Maynard.
Sorry. I beg your pardon, sorry. So,
Ready?
I need L plates at the front here. We didn't vote on the motion. Beg your pardon, sorry, Rosalie.
No problem.
The question is that the item in closed session at item number 22 be moved into open session, and it's moved by Councillor Wass, seconded by Councillor Midgley. All those in favour? Against? Motion is carried unanimously. My apologies. Thank you.
Okay. Rosalie Maynard, Blackmans Bay. I've got a couple of questions about climate change, and in light of the recently released IPCC report and the climate change related emergencies that are happening around the world with increasingly severe floods and wildfires, my questions are, given the new urgency from the IPCC report, will Kingborough Council take the lead in enacting ramped up responses to climate change, rather than waiting for the state government to decide their plans as has been previously advised?
Smee, would you like to comment on that? We don't have Mr. Dool with us tonight.
Mayor, I think it would be best if we take that question on notice.
Okay, so my second part of that question is, which parts of Council's climate change plans and strategies will be under renewed consideration for more urgent actions?
Once again, we'll have to take that one on notice because we don't have Mr. Dool with us here this evening.
Fine. And I've got a couple of other questions about the Blackmans Bay skyline.
Mm-hmm.
So the thinning of the highly valued Blackmans Bay treed skyline, particularly in the Burwood Drive area, is becoming increasingly noticeable and of concern, despite assurances that changes in zoning from the new statewide planning scheme would not adversely impact these previous environmental living areas. So my questions are, will the new statewide planning scheme remove previous protections on our skyline which have been in place?
Ms. Tyler Moore.
Through you, Mayor, the Tasmanian Planning Scheme, when it comes into effect, will mean that you can't apply what is currently called the Biodiversity Code, or we call it the Natural Areas Code, in the new scheme, and you're not able to apply it to general residential, inner residential, low-density residential zones, which that Blackmans Bay area is in that zoning. So you're correct. That protection of the vegetation will be removed, and further to that, the A4 component under those zonings will also go about, which includes that trees of significance can be protected.
Okay, so the second question, even if passed by the Tasmanian Planning Commission, can the proposed special area plan for the Burwood Drive area be overridden by the latest IPD4 planning directions and the statewide planning scheme?
Ms. Tyler Moore.
Through you, Mayor, we could look to put a specific area plan on that area. At this point, we don't have that, which would allow us to protect some vegetation through that if it's approved by the Tasmanian Planning Commission. Because we haven't had any of them tested yet, we don't know how well they're going to receive that. They might be fully in support, so it might go well, which would mean that we would go to apply it in other areas, but at this stage, we're unsure, we're waiting for direction.
Okay, so just one last quick question. So am I incorrect in thinking that Council has proposed a special area plan for the Burwood Drive area?
Ms. Tyler Moore.
Through you, Mayor, I feel like should definitely know the answer, but I'm feeling that we don't have a specific area plan over that, but I can double check that, take that on notice.
All right,
because
thank you.
it might just be a memory lapse in that part.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Do any other members of the public gallery wish to ask a question? Thank you very much. Questions on notice from the public on page 2. We had a question from Tricia Ramsey on behalf of the Kingborough Ratepayers Association in relation to risk management strategy, and there was an officer's response from Mr. Breen. Also from Ms. Ramsey on behalf of the Kingborough Ratepayers Association, an officer's response from Dr. Katrina Stevenson, and that it was in relation to subdivision costs borne by ratepayers. We move now on page 4 to questions without notice from councillors. Do any councillors have any questions? Councillor Bastone, and then Councillor Gladeright, then Councillor Fox.
Thank you. I have several questions, sorry. In relation to my question at the last council meeting regarding the installation of insulation bats being placed in the ceiling of the Woodbridge Hall, it was stated there had been insufficient money to do this, as the roof's cost budgeted for $75,000 had in fact been overcost by $2,000. How many jobs contracted in the last year have come in right on budget, and what is the average overrun on notice, I would imagine?
Thank you.
My second question is probably also on notice. What are the options now for placing the bats? Are they able to be done at the same time as the toilets are replaced, or will there need to be a third area of work done on the hall? On
Do you want to
notice?
take that on notice, or do you want to... No, the Acting General Manager, Mr. Smee.
Okay.
Through you, Mayor, we've been able to resolve the installation of the insulation, and it will take place within the next month.
Thank you. My third question is, what are the timeframes for the toilet replacements on the Woodbridge Hall? Bearing in mind Woodbridge is celebrating 175 years of white settlement on March 22nd, and there are many festivities that are being held that will be centred on the hall.
Mr. Smee.
Through you, Mayor, we are just waiting on a building permit to do the works. We have a builder lined up and we have funding in place. So as soon as we receive our building permit, we can commence work. We have a planning permit, so it shouldn't be more than a month or so before we're able to commence work.
Thank you. This is also another one for Mr. Smee, and we have already spoken of it. When will work start on the new toilet block at Kettering? The cricket season will start soon, and it had been hoped the work would be finished prior to the start of the season.
Mr. Smee.
Through the Chair, the hold-up on Kettering has been the availability of a wastewater designer. With the building industry the way it is at the moment, there are a very limited number of wastewater designers, and it's been extremely difficult obtaining the necessary report that we need to determine the condition of the existing waste disposal facility, or whether we need to construct a new one, and then this has an impact on the location of the new facility we're going to construct. So we have a new project manager on board now. He's taking carriage of this particular project and is putting the pressure on the designer, and if we don't get any luck, we're going to have to find another one. So we are very aware of the desire of the cricket club to have it done before the start of the season, but with the construction industry the way it is, it's very difficult to find a range of consultants and contractors to do the work.
Thank you. And my final question, as councillors are able to claim their mileage expenses as part of their work in the electorate, could we please be supplied with a logbook to record this to make our claims easier?
Mr. Breen is nodding, so yes.
Thank you, Mr. Breen.
Thank you. I had Councillor Fox and then Councillor Gladeright.
Thank you, Mayor Reid. I have concerns about the Howden interchange and the road safety concerns that were raised by the residents which actually led to the state government doing the Channel Highway Huntingfield to Margate corridor study. And that corridor study has been completed, but I understand none of the actions highlighted in that study have been undertaken, particularly the reduction in speed of the Channel Highway between the golf course and Fairies Road, which was recommended to go down to 80 kilometres an hour from 90, and also vegetation removal to improve sight distances. And they were the issues that were originally triggered the study. And I'm just very concerned that with the increase in traffic now on the Channel Highway and the high speeds on that road, often exceeding 100k, it's becoming nearly impossible to get out of Howden Road many times during the day, and not just occasionally, but most of the day. And I think that the waiting time was acknowledged as being excessive. I'd just like to know what action will result from that study and where the Department of Main Roads is at with that particular study.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we don't have Mr. Breen with us here, Mr. Reeve with us here this evening, so we'll get that on notice.
He did anticipate my question, and I've asked him in advance. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Gladwright.
Thank you. I note Mr. Reeve isn't here, so this may be a question for him too, but there's a lot of chatter about a pedestrian crossing on Beach Road, and I was just wondering if this has ever been considered and what was decided and why.
Yeah, we'll have to take that one on notice. I know that we did have a discussion about it about 6 or 8 weeks ago. It came up and there were concerns that the Department of State Growth expressed about it, having it near the corner, but my personal view is that it could be further up, opposite where the bus stop is on Beach Road. Mm-hmm. So we'll take that on notice and hopefully circulate something around.
Great, thank you. And my second question was just about the recent census. Does Kingborough, will we receive any data from that census?
We will, but not for some time. It takes them about a year to process it.
Right, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Midgley.
Thank you, Mayor. The first question is regarding the Margate to Kingston feasibility study, and I note in the last state election the Liberal government did promise some funding towards this study. Have we heard any more in regards to when this will happen and if there will be money available? Because I note in the budget we've also put some money aside for this study as well.
We will have to take that one on notice as well because we don't have Mr. Reeve here. It was his night to be here, but we'll take that one on notice if you don't mind.
That's okay. I have maybe a few more for Mr. Reeve as well, relating to some of the appendix matters, which are always quite interesting to read as well, especially the KWS report. I note that it says in general waste there was more waste received than expected. I'm interested to know perhaps the breakdown of what that more waste than expected could be. I can see some of the figures in the green waste that there has been some decreasing, but we're still not dropping that much.
Mm-hmm. Take that on notice.
And thanks for the council works update. It's really fantastic to see, and I know that there's a lot of social media conversations about some of these works update. I'm wondering, do we send these capital works, which is, the images and the explanations, do we send that out to the Kingborough Consultative Forum at all?
Dr. Stevenson, would you like to answer that for us?
No, because they're in the public agenda, I don't tend to repeat what's already in the public domain, but if they wanted to, I can.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I note on page 352 in the report, what's it titled? The Quarterly Summary Action Report, the Youth Action Network. I note that it's meeting again. And would it be possible at all to have some sort of summary regarding some of the projects that they're working on, or is the Youth Action Network actually aware of some of the community conversations that are occurring around activities or lack thereof, activities for young people? And I was wondering what their thoughts and ideas were in regards to that.
The Youth Action Network, through you, Mayor, the Youth Action Network have undertaken a survey recently, so I am intending to bring those results to Council along with a survey that the youth officer and other members of community services are doing with young people using the park. So we'll bring those both those results forward to council once they're complete.
Great, thank you. And Mayor, I just would like to ask a few questions regarding a question that I asked around public art ideas and thoughts for the Kingborough Community Hub. I'm aware last year there was some discussion around applying for a grant to do a mosaic project, and from recollection with conversation with you, Mayor, regarding the Access and Advisory Committee visiting the space and needing some more colour for, excuse the term, visibility or just contrast and things like that. And there was a discussion about doing some public art around the planter boxes. So I was wasn't sure where those ideas were not on the list.
Dr. Stevenson. They got painted black, by the way, which is not quite what I had in mind.
While there was some conversation about seeking funding for a mosaic project, I felt it was important that we actually looked holistically at our brand new architecturally designed hub and thought about art in a holistic way rather than a piecemeal way, so that it's sympathetic to the new building. And part of moving community services there is to be able to see how the building is used and build an art program from that. Very hard to do when the building had been vacant over the COVID period.
Great. Thank you so much for that explanation. I note next week we have a workshop regarding Transform Kingston. Will that provide us with an update in regards to some of the outcomes relating to the Play Score initiatives and projects?
I'm not aware yet of the content of the workshop, but I'm advised by the Acting General Manager that it will. Thank you. Are there any other questions on notice from councillors? Councillor Bastogne.
Sorry, I forgot one.
That's all right.
This is probably also for Mr. Reeve. Was an environmental study done on the beach at Dens Point, where Missionary Road comes into Dens Point? There used to be a beach there with, which was a nesting habitat, and the beach has been totally destroyed due to a new rock wall being placed. And I just wondered if a study had been done prior to the wall being rebuilt.
We'll take that on notice. I do know that Mr. Reeve did circulate quite a lengthy response to that recently. I'm not sure, you received a copy? Okay, thank you. We'll take that one on notice. Any further questions without notice? Councillor Cordova.
Thank you, Mayor. Does Council have any intention of undertaking regular noise pollution assessments at Gunpowder Jetty, noting the answer to my previous question on notice? And if not, why not?
Mr. Dool isn't here, but I suspect it's because it's the domain of the EPA, unless Dr. Stevenson would like to provide any further advice. Your light's not on.
I think the initial reply starts to indicate the issues. So there's domain issues, there's resourcing issues, and so no, we are not planning to undertake regular noise checks there.
Thank you. And just to follow up on that, what would be the trigger at which point Council would undertake its responsibilities to check for noise? And just to clarify for the minutes, this is regarding the operations of salmon farms specifically. Yeah.
We have not received, as far as I'm aware, any formal complaints, and we need a formal complaint.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions without notice? We move now to questions on notice from councillors. Before we do, I forgot to mention Councillor Grace did ask me to share with the meeting the reason for his apology, and I forgot, and he told me he's watching from home. He's been in contact with somebody who has been asked to self-isolate, so he wanted to make sure he did the right thing and didn't expose anybody here to anything that he could be carrying. So my apologies to Councillor Grace watching along at home, who will otherwise, if he hasn't already emailed me in relation to me forgetting to actually say that. So we're grateful for him taking that safe route. Questions on notice from councillors. On page 4 we have a question from Councillor Gladright and an officer's response from Mr. Reeve in relation to amendments to regulations to allow e-scooters, e-skateboards on footpaths. A further question from Councillor Gladewright and an officer's response from Mr Smee in relation to security cameras at the hub. A question from Councillor Cordova and an officer's response from Mr Dool about offshore salmon farm noise pollution. A question from Councillor Gladewright and an officer's response from Mr Reeve in relation to compostable nappies in FOGO bins. And finally, a question from Councillor Midgley and an officer's response from Dr Katrina Stevenson on art programs. The open session of Council now adjourns and the Planning Authority commences at 5:55 p.m. The first item is on page 7 under Officers' Reports to the Planning Authority. It is a development application for 36 multiple dwellings at 37 to 59 Maranoa Road and access over 99 Channel Highway in Kingston. Do I have a mover and a seconder for that motion? Moved Councillor Westwood, seconded Councillor Street. Councillor Westwood.
Thank you, Mayor. We have before us a development application for 36 multiple dwellings at 37 to 59 Maranoa Road and access over 99 Channel Highway, Kingston. Council received 7 representations against the proposal, raising issues such as traffic issues, including delays and safety issues, pedestrians and cycling issues, and the impact on adjacent property and units. The application is recommended for approval with 13 conditions attached, and I had one question which focuses on overshadowing in terms of neighbouring properties. If we could have a discussion about how that has been addressed and in what capacity that needs to be addressed, that would be good.
Ms Tyler Moore.
Through you, Mayor, overshadowing comes about, consideration of the overshadowing comes about whether the development fits within the building envelope. The proposal, as you can see in the report, has very few discretions, but the building envelope part is one of those. But as the officers included in the report, it's fairly minimal and is considered to meet the performance criteria by not causing a large amount of overshadowing onto the neighbouring properties.
Thank you. So this is recommended for approval. It does have 13 conditions attached and it meets the conditions of the planning scheme.
Thank you. Any further speakers? Councillor Gladewright.
When it comes to the local area objectives, and it talks about land will be utilised for residential purposes to the maximum extent and in a manner that optimises high quality design and amenity outcomes, how can we be confident that this development is meeting that criteria, given that there's no vegetation that's going to be retained on the site?
Ms Tyler Moore.
Through you, Mayor, it's an unfortunate fact that the planning scheme is fairly weak on what powers it has to do with the local area objectives. So whilst I completely acknowledge that they're written there and we can consider them, the level of consideration is unfortunately fairly low. We had that tested in a Rampac case where it was argued, where council tried to argue about the local area objectives and their purpose and their role, and that a development in that particular matter was completely contrary to that, only for Rampac to rule that it had no real bearing, which is very unfortunate and certainly not a doing of Kingborough. It's just how the system's set up. So with respect to how does it optimise high quality and design, it could have been delivered or assessed in a way if there were actually criteria for us to assess it against. So for example, if there was an acceptable solution that said, I mean it's a bit down to personal preference, but is it high quality, or it must be high quality because the materials reflect what the neighbourhood character are, then we would have a criteria to assess it against. Unfortunately, the zoning, or none of the zonings give us that ability to do that. So we're unable to assess neighbourhood character. It talks about amenity outcomes, and amenity refers to overlooking, overshadowing generally. And on a more holistic thought, you might think amenity relates to vegetation. Again, the planning scheme, when you actually come down to the parts that we get to assess, it doesn't really have regard to that. So the overshadowing obviously was asked about before, the overlooking, that's been addressed in the report as well. And unfortunately, we didn't write it, the interim scheme, doesn't talk about the amenity given to a community or an area through trees.
So we have a development application here which is going to remove all of the vegetation, and it still meets all the criteria in the scheme.
Through you, Mayor, that's correct, but it was actually the vegetation removal was approved as part of the subdivision, which has already been approved prior to this.
Okay, so as the planning authority, we have to vote for this because it meets all of the criteria, but is there an option where we can say, yes, I'm voting for it, but not happy? Is that an option?
No, we just express that. We often have this discussion and express our displeasure with the planning scheme, and yeah, you just have to make that contribution.
Okay, I want it on the public record. This is horrendous, and I know it's not your fault, it's the current government's fault, is that correct?
Yep,
yep.
Pretty much, in a nutshell.
Yep, so let's think about, I don't know, voting another government in next time round.
I think we might need to, we might be a little bit off the topic of the planning authority here, so I might just move on, but thank you for your contribution. And I've got Councillor Bastone next.
Thank you. My question is to Mrs. Tyler Moore. It relates to Zone 2, Blocks C and D, the very small one-bedroom and two-bedroom units. When I look at the plan, the downstairs one-bedroom units appear to have a window in the bedroom which is at the back of the carport and will be totally roofed over by bedroom 1 in the upper block. So there will in fact be really no natural light able to go in. It's on page 44 and 45. The same with the downstairs terrace for the downstairs apartments. They appear to be totally roofed over by the terraces for the upstairs apartments, which again is causing lack of light to come in. So the downstairs units have almost no natural light coming in. Is this right?
Ms. Tyler Moore.
Through you, Mayor, that is correct. It's an unfortunate outcome, and it's not something we assess under planning, unfortunately. To do with windows and ventilation, or natural light and ventilation to bedrooms or living areas is dealt with under the Building Act. They'll need to be able to satisfy the building surveyor of the outcome of that. And the planning scheme doesn't really refer to natural light or sustainability of the houses. That is a weakness of the scheme. And with respect to natural light to living areas, IPD4 has actually removed the requirement for that northern aspect for the living areas. But a bedroom's not a living area, not a lounge room area.
Right, and the upper units have no car parking at all, is that right?
Ms. Tyler Moore.
Through you, Mayor, that's incorrect. Their parking is the parking that's provided. There's angle parking next to that building.
Right. Now, is there any way, because we've already have to, you already say that the downstairs units do not comply, and because of the lack of outdoor space, it's marginally short, but it is short. So is there no way that we can use that to reject this particular part of the application?
Ms. Tyler Moore.
Through you, Mayor, it doesn't not comply, doesn't meet the acceptable solution, and the planning schemes are written as performance assessment planning schemes, meaning that if you don't meet the acceptable solution, you default to the performance criteria, and you must satisfy that performance criteria, and that's how the report is written, where we write the justification. It's the officer's assessment that they believe that it does meet the performance criteria, again, there's not a lot of criteria to assess against in the performance criteria. I would advise against refusing an application on a single matter like that. Obviously, the councillors can make the decision, but when it meets so many other criteria, it'd be a hard case to push.
Right, because one of the things in the officer's assessment is that the area outside of 12.2 square metres of outside area for these totally dark premises is that there's enough room for children to play. These are one-bedroom apartments and are unlikely to have children playing anyway. So part of the officer's assessment is perhaps not quite... I'm really struggling to try and find some reason why we could reject these really inappropriate living conditions that they wish to build here. This is a slum in the making.
Ms Tullamore.
Through you, Mayor, the officers made reference to child play, because if you go to the part that we must assess, and I'll just find the right part.
Yeah, sorry.
So page 13, at the bottom, we talk about the heading there, site coverage and private open space. The first part that we put in that table is acceptable solution. So if you meet that tick, you don't need to move on to the performance criteria. You need to go to the performance criteria, we list it there verbatim what it says in the planning scheme, and that is what the officer has to assess it against. So the planning scheme has no regard to how big the house is or how many occupants are. They just have a blanket performance criteria regardless of how big or what the nature or the style of the development is. Adequate space, I mean, it's a hard question to answer really. Is there adequate space for the children to play? Perhaps if they're going to play chess. Meters. It's not something we could really mount much of an argument against, unfortunately.
Right, I'm very depressed about this. The rest of the development is pretty awful, but though this particular section is really horrendous for people to live in.
Councillor Cordova, I think I had you next on my list.
Thank you very much, Mayor, and I think we've touched on most things because it's going to be a long agenda. I won't speak long on this, but to say that I recognise and I thank the people who made their submissions opposing this development, or indeed no matter what their opinion was of the development, I thank people for getting involved. The traffic, the pedestrians, the cyclist issues, the parking, we've heard about, but as the report says that these comply. A quick question on parking. Can you please take us through I realise that there's 74 spaces, I think there are, and parking complies. What's the calculation about why visitor parking... Please take us through parking for residents and visitors. What's the requirement and how come this meets it?
Ms Tullamore.
Through you, Mayor, the best calculation you'll find is on page 51. This is our checklist that we use to do the assessments, which goes through the zone and all the codes that apply to the application. So page 51 has E6 parking and access code. So it says if you need 7 one-bedroom dwellings, 7 cars. So if it's a one-bedder, you need 1 space. If it's 2 or more bedder, or a house that contains a room that could be used as a bedroom, because we're on to that, you need 2 parking spaces, and then you need 1 visitor parking space per 4 dwellings. And that's how you get to the number.
And so that's the ratio 35/4 equals 9 visitor car parking spaces?
Yes.
Perfect, thank you. That clarifies that. The real issue here, of course, is that the proposal does not comply in relation to the ground floor units in Block C, as we've heard, that they have their private open space provided as decks of 12.22 metres squared. However, they don't have a finished floor level that's entirely above 1.8 metres above the finished ground level, excluding garage, carport or entry foyer. All other units have complying private open space. And so I take the recommendation or I respect the recommendation of the planning officers, but here's where I disagree. The performance criteria, it says, according to our planning officers, that the performance criteria here, so we're talking now about 11.4.3, private open space. The fact is that this proposal does not have enough private open space. It should have 24 metres squared with those kind of deck areas, not 12.22. And here I'm quoting, the proposal does not comply in relation to ground floor units in Block C that have their private open space provided as decks of 12.22 square metres. However, they don't have a finished floor level above 1.8 metres above the finished ground level. The reason why we're supposed to believe that it meets the performance criteria is because, quote, the decks face northwest and will receive good solar access, and also, quote, the private open space areas are able to serve as an extension of the dwelling for outdoor relaxation, dining, entertaining, and children's play in the same manner as the upper level dwellings in Block C. And yet, on page 14, it then says, quote, the dwellings in Block C will have a fold-out clothesline or rack provided on the deck area. So I'm supposed to hold these two ideas simultaneously, that it's going to be a great entertainment outdoor area, but also it's way too small. It's smaller than the performance criteria, forgive me, it's smaller than the acceptable solution allows. And it's got a fold-out clothesline. This kind of indicates to you how much space there is for outdoor dining and relaxation. There isn't enough space. There isn't enough private open space, and I respectfully disagree with the assessment that it meets the performance criteria. I don't think it does for that reason, and so because it doesn't comply with 11.4.3, I'll be voting against it. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms Tyler-Moore, did you want to comment on the clothesline or any of the issues that Councillor Cordover has raised? Pass. Councillor Wass.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I will support this recommendation. I've been through the report. I'm convinced by staff who have more knowledge of mine, unlike my colleague to my right who is new to planning and yet knows more than some of the staff, which really astounds me. I don't necessarily agree that this is the type of issues we want. Someone indicated earlier on it's a slum in the making. I totally agree. There are a number of issues. Noise worries me. Parking worries me. The open space worries me. But it does meet the planning scheme. Therefore, we have no alternative but to vote yes on it. If we don't and it's appealed, those people in those windowless buildings make a decision, and that's how we should be looking at this, not knowing what's happening in that area. And that is the concentration of whether or not it meets the planning scheme. There are a number of issues that we face in Kingborough. One, we do want infill or high density buildings, because the more that we have, the more broadfield estates that will be reduced. But I do believe we need some say in going forward potential slum areas. And I think that is up to us as a council to have, if you like, an appendix to our planning scheme, or to make the planning scheme have that in there. I know when I first joined council, my question to the planner officer of the day was, how can we ensure that buildings meet a certain criteria? And the response was that we can't, because it's not built into the planning scheme. We need to continue those, and I think there's a journey that we can make. But as I indicated in my opening remarks, I believe that it does meet the planning scheme. Our staff believes that it meets the planning scheme, and therefore I would suggest that we need to vote yes. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Midgley.
Thank you, Mayor. A question regarding the planning scheme. Is there anything relating to a concrete landscaping type ratio, e.g. more landscaping, less concrete?
Ms Tyler-Moore.
Through you, Mayor, up until IPD4, there was a permeability limit in particular zones, and that's been taken out, and it will not be there for the incoming Tasmanian planning scheme.
Thank you. It's so depressing hearing these things that have been taken out. In regards to the green space or public open space for this type of development, was that ever a part of a planning scheme at all? Again, so we're not facing these discussions and representations and criterias around that, you know, the lack of space, or discussions around enough space for children to play. Has that ever been a part of a planning scheme for this type?
Through you, Mayor, has it been a discussion at state government level? Unknown to us, don't know. Is it something that we can address? We could potentially look at it through SAPs, but this is a matter that is broadly across council, not site specific. So the SAPs are meant to be a geographic area to be able to put it on. Although it hasn't been tested how far you can make that geographic area, we're yet to find that out, and I believe some councils have got quite large areas to do that. That would probably be the only mechanism, or to advocate to the state government. However, obviously these comments aren't particularly relevant to this application. There is a broader planning discussion
Thank you.
to be had.
Thank you for answering that. In regards to the matters raised by Councillor Bastone and Councillor Cordova in the 11.4.3, were any of those matters discussed with the applicant in regards to the space, the lack of sunlight, and even though they, that discussion around the planning scheme, were any of those matters ever raised with the developer and actually tried to work through, or a consideration?
Ms Tullamore.
Through you, Mayor, I wasn't involved in. The officer did have discussions with the applicant about aspects of the design and the layout, more to do with what is able to be assessed under the planning scheme, and I would have to look at the council records to see if there were further discussions about opinions of or offers of potential improvements for that design. We do that from time to time with applicants and offer our professional advice, because obviously we have seen many units. But it is kind of guided a bit how receptive the applicant might be to that discussion, because some applicants obviously will just say, well, if it's not in the scheme, I'm not really interested. Other people are. I've got no suggestion of what the matter was for this particular application, and I'm not privy to the discussions that were there unless I looked at council records.
Thank you. For my contribution, before I ask Councillor Westwood to sum up, like some of the others that have spoken tonight, I have concerns about the density of this. Although I believe there is a market for one-bedroom units with people who want to downsize, particularly for elderly people. I think what concerns me about all of the developments that we're seeing is that and this one in particular is close to obviously a major shopping centre, but they're not built in an accessible way for people who have mobility issues. And I'm just wondering if Ms Tullamore, it's very hard to see on the size of the plans here, but it didn't appear to me that there were any that you would term DDA compliant for accessibility. Could you just confirm, do you believe what the situation with that is?
In response to your question, DDA is not considered at the planning level. I'm not qualified to comment on whether they are DDA compliant or not. I don't believe the Tasmanian, even under the Building Act, there's a requirement of a ratio of number of dwellings that have to be DDA or potentially be DDA. So it's not in the planning scheme. We can't really look at it. I understand where you're coming from. You can potentially go into something like a SAP. Sorry to mention the SAPs again. An example where council has tried to do that was with the Kingston Park SAP, where it was encouraged to have a portion of those included.
Thank you. I just think about the discussions we have at the Access Committee about the need for, that it's far cheaper to have something that is DDA compliant at the start than trying to retrofit it at the end, but that there is a very small amount of housing stock that people with disabilities can just move into. So it's really disappointing to see that it's not included in the scheme and that we don't have to mandate that there should be accessibility, because as far as I could see on the plans, all of these units appeared to have stairs in them. So it is disappointing. So like others, I express my concern about this. I'm not happy about having to vote to support it, but we've heard from our manager of planning that it would be not wise to test this at the tribunal because we would likely lose it based on trying to rely on the argument that we talked about previously about performance criteria. So, Councillor Westwood, would you like to close the debate?
Thank you, Mayor. I think what we've heard around the table is that this type of living arrangement would not suit most of us. It certainly would not suit my family of 2 adults, 4 children, 1 dog, 3 sheep and 4 chooks. But it does suit the needs of a number of people in our community, whether they be looking to downsize or whether they be a professional couple or a single person with no children. That's a decision for the person who ultimately buys that piece of accommodation. Myself and a couple of my colleagues attended the Salvo's sleep out last week, and we heard of people who don't have a roof over their head at all. So having the option of purchasing a 1-bedroom dwelling, even though it doesn't have the exact amount of private open space and it has a fold-out washing line, is certainly much better than having to sleep somewhere that's not safe and not warm. And so given this meets the acceptable solutions and performance criteria for the inner residential zone and the relevant codes in the Kingborough Interim Planning Scheme 2015, it is recommended for approval, and it's not up to us to make a decision as to whether we would personally like to live in a 1-bedroom or 2-bedroom unit or not. So this meets the planning scheme. It is recommended for approval by our planners, and I would urge my colleagues to support the recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Westwood. The motion before us is, the recommendation is on page 19. It is the development application for 36 multiple dwellings at 37 to 59 Maranoa Road and access over 99 Channel Highway, Kingston. Be approved. There are 13 conditions attached to it. It was moved by Councillor Westwood, seconded by Councillor Street. All those in favour? Against? Motion, division is required. All those in favour, please raise your hands. Councillors Wass, Midgley, Gladeright, Fox, Street, Bastone, Westwood and Reet. Those against? Councillor Cordova. The motion is carried. We move now to page 55. It is a development application for 55 multiple dwellings and demolition of existing dwelling, including stormwater and sewer infrastructure. Do I have a mover and a seconder for that motion? Moved by Councillor Street, seconded by Councillor Westwood. Councillor Street.
Thank you, Mayor, and I thank staff for the report on this application. Mayor, the proposed multiple dwellings do comply with the acceptable solutions and performance criteria for the general residential zone and the relevant codes in the planning scheme. And staff have recommended the application for approval with conditions, of which there are many. And those conditions, I do think, adequately take into account concerns that both our staff and to many extents representatives have had about this development. I feel as though we are probably going to be in a bit of a Groundhog Day situation with this application as compared to the last one, but I think a lot of what Councillor Westwood said on the last application is relevant to this one as well. And it's worth remembering that we're assessing this application as a planning authority and assessing whether it meets the terms of the planning scheme, which we may not always personally like, but that is the planning scheme before us and the prism upon which, or within which, we need to assess the application. And I know that that is a difficult pill for some representatives to swallow, and I completely understand that, especially when land has been used for a particular purpose for so long, and there's an expectation, reasonable or otherwise, that it will continue that way forever. I understand the concerns that have been raised, but I do think that they've been adequately dealt with, and where they haven't been dealt with, or where there's a belief that they haven't been adequately dealt with, I simply have to come back to the fact that we as a planning authority now are making an assessment against the planning scheme within which I think this application fits. So I thank staff for the report. I thank them for the work that they've done in terms of the recommended motion and the conditions which assist in making this application comply, and I commend the motion to Council.
Thank you, Councillor Street. Councillor Westwood.
Thank you, Mayor. I note that following representations, and we should note we received 19 representations in relation to this development application. I note that the number of dwellings was reduced by 4 and that a number of other amendments were made, and I appreciate the efforts on the part of the applicant to do that in response to those representations. Was there any discussion with the developer about a second exit and entry point?
Ms. Tyler Moore.
Through you, Mayor, I don't have the detail of all the discussions that occurred with the officer. This design came with the traffic impact assessment that deemed that the access that is proposed is preferable. Obviously, you can't have access onto the southern outlet to the rear, and even the accesses to Channel Highway is somewhat limited, and trying to limit that because of the congestion matters and overall traffic and intentions of the road network in the area.
Thank you. And in terms of car parking, there is provision for 2 car parking spaces per dwelling plus 14 visitor parking spaces, a total of 124 spaces. How does this compare to the number that are actually required for the development?
Through you, Mayor, again, the checklist which is on page, the relevant part is page 122. At the bottom under E6, Parking and Access Code. So each of the dwellings needed 2 spaces, and then there were the visitor spaces required, so 115 spaces, and therefore it meets the requirement. There's no reduction of parking.
Thank you. Sorry, I missed that. So 115 spaces required, and it's allowing for 124. One more question I had in relation to a condition. So I note that the development application is recommended for approval with, I think it was 23 conditions. Condition 10 requires a financial contribution of $21,600 paid to Council's Environmental Fund prior to the removal of vegetation and the commencement of works. It references the protection and management of a potential habitat for the skipper moth. Are there any skipper moths in that area, and why the 21,600?
Ms. Tyler Moore.
Through you, Mayor, there may be skipper moths in that area. They are a protected species, and whilst the developer submitted a report where they didn't find any, doesn't mean that there aren't any. They're not that easy to spot, obviously, but it is potential habitat. So this Eucalyptus ovata forest is the primary habitat for the skipper moth, and part of the intention is not just because you don't find a moth on the day doesn't mean that they're not there. It's about having the habitat preserved for the moths to go there and breed, and if there are a few left, then they have an opportunity to create a population in the area. The question was, why is it $21,600? It's based on the calculation of the number of trees that were removed and the values of the high priority biodiversity value that was found in that area. The report does include a calculation in it. So, yeah, it's based on a set calculation.
Thank you. I have had a number of emails about this, which I have taken into account. But again, this meets the requirements of the planning scheme. I am encouraged that in response to the representations received, that the developer has made an effort to reduce the number of dwellings and to make some other concessions to respond to some of the issues raised, and I'm comfortable that this meets the planning scheme.
Thank you, Councillor Westwood. Councillor Bastone.
Thank you. I'm not sure if this actually falls under planning. Mrs. Tyler-Moore will tell me, but Breezer Court leads into Moore Road, or Moore Road, which is almost directly opposite Redwood Road. And I wonder if there's any way we can have people coming out of Moore Road only being able to turn left. If they're turning right into the Channel Highway to go down to the what I call the Mitre 10 roundabout, the cars turning left out of Redwood Road will be almost upon them before they're across the road. Although the line of sight is clear, it's very close, and it's very difficult to cross that street, as the Mayor and I, or that road, as the Mayor and I know, having tried to walk across it. Traffic's moving quite fast along there. So do we have any control over people turning out of Moore Road?
Ms Tyler-Moore.
Through you, Mayor, you were right. It's not a planning matter, unfortunately. That's an existing road condition that Council would need to look at separately, probably through the engineering services. If this application was building a new intersection, creating the problem, then it is something we would look at, and we would look at controlling access in that manner if it was supported, obviously, by a traffic impact assessment. But it's an existing condition, existing road network problem that Council will need to look at, and I'm not sure whether parts of that is controlled by the Department of State Growth. So it's separate to this.
Thank you.
Councillor Midgley.
Thank you, Mayor. Looking at page 65, the topic around the traffic impact assessment, it states that to facilitate the safe pedestrian movements across the Channel Highway, there'll be a standard pedestrian refuge. Who pays for that standard pedestrian refuge? Is that the developer who has to install that?
Ms Tyler-Moore.
Through you, Mayor, it's my understanding that that was part of the proposal, so they will pay for the installation of that refuge. I may need to double check the conditions for that, but if it's part of the proposal, generally they need to pay for that.
Okay, thank you. And when I read the number of vehicle movements per day, 55 units of 275 vehicles a day and 28 vehicles traffic periods on Moyer Road, and then the speculation for what that will be in the future, that to me seems quite significant and almost like we'll be facing a problem that's happening. I know I can't relate it to other things in the planning scheme, but anyway, relating to like the Howden, that sort of road intersection. Why, at what point does then it generate a second? I guess the traffic impact assessment hasn't generated the consideration of another access way, but at what point would it?
Ms Tyler-Moore.
Through you, Mayor, in this instance, the traffic impact analysis that was done by an independent person or company has not deemed that there is a need to look at that future congestion issue. There are some parameters about when and what occasions you would need to address those issues, and obviously they have deemed that it wasn't warranted in this. There are examples where we have developments where they need to look at it sooner. An example was the St Aloysius taking over the Vodafone building, where there's a condition that requires that after a certain period they must do further traffic surveys, and at that point may have to do an upgrade to part of that road network. So that was deemed, and that was identified by in the traffic impact assessment, traffic impact analysis. So my apologies because I keep calling it the assessment analysis, but that didn't occur in this instance. And upon reviewing that report, we didn't disagree with the facts. We do have the ability to disagree with the facts if we aren't satisfied with what is presented, but our development engineers must have been satisfied with the numbers.
Thank you. And apologies if I've missed this, but is it part of the planning scheme to include any linkages and active transport routes through the development so that it can, is that like going to be a walking track to get to the Channel Highway, so it's not so landlocked and allowing for cars only?
Through you, Mayor, they are proposing the footway, which you can see on the plans, which comes out to the Channel Highway from the end of the cul-de-sac, so you don't have to go all the way back down Moir Road. No, the planning scheme doesn't, unfortunately, and it doesn't require those sorts of links. If it was a subdivision application, there's elements of that assessment that require links and access ways, but not a unit development.
Okay, but thank you. Through you, Mayor. So, Ms Tyler Moore, we can be reassured that is a good thing the developer has done, the applicant has done, is putting an active transport link to ensure that there is a pathway to walk rather than just having to drive around and use, and so it's sort of a bit pedestrian friendly and perhaps bike friendly is what I'm hoping.
Councillor Fox.
Just leading on from Councillor Midgley's questions, I understand the Channel Highway still belongs to the state government because when they built the bypass, before they built the bypass, that was the major link to Margate, and I don't think council has ever taken over the Channel Highway, and there was a proposal that if that was no longer a major link, that it would be reduced in speed, that would become a 50k zone, and rather than a 60k zone, which would make it a lot safer for pedestrians and cyclists, and that's why that particular route is so important in the bike plan. But I'm just concerned that all this subdivision development along this road now is really exacerbating the issue, and I don't think there's been any movement between the state government and council to for council to take over this road now and to be able to rectify all these traffic issues that are now emerging. I'm just wondering what the time span is going to be if we're receiving all these development applications and there's probably a huge amount of traffic being generated in the near future. What is the time span on trying to solve this problem?
Sorry. Ms Tyler Moore.
Through you, Mayor, unfortunately that discussion is outside the assessment of this application. It's one that council would need to have as a council, and it would need to involve engineering services. You are correct, I believe that this part of Channel Highway is still maintained by DSG, but I don't have the information, and it's probably not the relevant forum to discuss discussions about traffic controls or ownership responsibilities.
I appreciate that response, but I also think it's worth highlighting to the staff that we need to do something about this, even though Mr Reeves not here at the moment. I'd just like to alert Mr Smee that maybe this is an issue that needs to be followed up by council. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further speakers? Councillor Gladwright and then Councillor Cordova.
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions. On page 57, it talks about the large eucalyptus tree is to be retained and a tree protection zone provided. What on earth is a tree protection zone? I didn't think we had any tree protection.
Ms Tyler Moore.
Through you, Mayor, I probably won't do a great service on explaining this. The tree protection zone is a nationally recognised zone around trees, and it's done on a calculation of the distance around the canopy of the tree, which I can't tell you off the top of my head the calculation of. I do know it, but I can't tell you that. And it allows a certain amount of encroachment. So there is an Australian standard that goes with it. So it's allowable to encroach within 10% of the tree protection zone, and it's measured from the distance from the trunk as well as the canopy. And it's discouraged to do anything greater, to have a greater percentage encroachment to that tree protection zone. So it's nationally recognised, it's an Australian standard, and it's obviously to protect the root zone of those trees.
Councillor Gladwright.
Why has it been triggered in this case, and why has it not been triggered for lots of other developments?
Ms Tyler Moore.
So through you, Mayor, generally we try and keep people out of the tree protection zone. So quite often you'll see on a site plan, you'll see the canopy of the tree is drawn, and then they draw a hatching around it to show the tree protection zone. We work really hard to try and keep people completely out of that zone. In some instances, you can't help it, and the Australian Centre does allow you to do the 10% encroachment in there. So it does come up on quite a lot of applications that we deal with, that we either condition that they must stay out of the tree protection zone or mustn't encroach it more, or they must do a treatment to try and help the tree improve its survival rate in the event that part of the tree protection zone is encroached.
So the tree protection zone is just in the case that a tree is going to be in that area, but it could get chopped down for some other reason. The tree protection zone doesn't protect it from being removed.
Ms. Tyler.
Through you, Mayor, no, it's not a protection in the terms of
Keeping
it saves the tree, that it, like a significant tree
Right.
register, it doesn't do that at all. Tree protection zone is just a technical term that identifies where you should stay out of as much as you can.
Right, I understand now, thank you. It talks about a noise barrier that's proposed. I'm also on page 57. Is there any guarantee that that's going to be put in place?
I think it's part of one of the conditions. Is that correct, Ms. Tyler?
Through you, Mayor, yes, that's correct. It's a condition of the requirement that they build the acoustic barrier. So similar to all the acoustic barriers that you see down the bypass, and there's certain requirements to satisfy that it is effective.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. And I just wanted to bring up as well the proposed footway across the Channel Highway, and I just am a bit confused. If that is a state government road, then how can a developer just put that crossing in there? I thought there was issues with that.
Through you, Mayor, no, they can't just do it. They would need approval from DSG to do that. It's not a crossing. It's not a bridge or a crossing. It's just a refuge. So it'll be a standout for them to do. I don't have the detailed design drawings before me. Sometimes the refuge may just be a part that juts out into the road, or it could be the refuge that sits in the middle of the road as the central part for people to refuge from traffic as they go across. So it would require DSG approval. I'm not aware whether they've already had those preliminary discussions or not.
So it's just aspirational at the moment?
My understanding is that it formed part of the plans, but I would have to get the detail on that.
Okay. I've also had some emails from a resident in, is it Jupiter Court? And her poor house is going to be shadowed for most of the day. Shadowing, I know it's been addressed in there, but is there any way that we could seek to have one of the units lowered to 1 story so that that property doesn't become shadowed for most of the day?
Ms. Tyler.
Through you, Mayor, if you go to pages for the other councillors, pages 89, 90 and 91, they're the shadow diagrams that are presented as part of the application. As you can see, Jupiter Court is on the left-hand side of the drawings. The plans are drawn at 9 a.m, midday and 3 p.m.
Yeah.
So that it appears from this the shadow will occur in the morning onto the houses. Obviously, I don't know which house you're referring to.
It is where that big shadow is.
But by midday, it's no longer on the house, and it needs to be remembered that a shadow falls at an angle. So if it, on a plan, it looks like it goes up, but it actually may just fall on the bottom brick as opposed to covering the whole window. So this is not considered under the planning scheme to be shadowed all day.
Okay.
And also it's within the building envelope.
Okay, thank you. Another question, when was the traffic impact assessment done? Do you know? Because a resident's claiming that it was done in 2017, so is it valid? I couldn't find anywhere.
We might just need a moment to find that.
Sorry, I'm new at this, so I could maybe email ahead next time.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry?
Through you, Mayor,
Thank you.
the traffic impact assessment that was written by Milan Pradovic is dated June 2021.
Okay.
It is possible that if this has come from a resident, I haven't read all the details of the traffic impact assessment tonight, perhaps some of the statistics that are used may come from another time because of the statistics that are available to the engineers.
Okay, thank you. That's all my questions. So for my substantive contribution, I just wanted to acknowledge that there is a housing crisis and that it is important that that is addressed. And once again, I would just like to express my disgust with the planning scheme, if I'm allowed.
Extreme disgust or just disgust? Thank you. Councillor Cordova.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you to my colleagues for their contributions so far. I just want to point out that in this proposal, following the advertised period and preliminary feedback from Council regarding the density of this proposed development and the potential for retention of additional high conservation value trees, amended plans were submitted. These plans reduced the number of units by 4 to comply with the density requirements of the scheme and also enable the retention of an additional high conservation value tree number 610. So to reiterate, the application was lodged at 55 and the proponent, to their credit, showed a willingness to amend their plans to reduce the number of dwellings and that density. Also to save one high conservation value tree. I believe that one is the one potentially that's on council land on the significant tree register. The proposal had a density per unit of 302 metres squared, and the acceptable solution A1 requires 325. And in response to that issue of density that was raised by the council and the submissions, the application was amended to remove those 4 units, and now the minimum that's required is 325, and they've agreed to 326 metres squared per unit. And so on that, it complies with clause 10.4.1 according to the council officers. So what we're looking at here with this proposal is that 3,000 square metres of eucalyptus ovata forest and woodland will require removal. And the vegetation is a high priority under Table E 10.1 of the planning scheme, as it's listed as endangered. And we've heard a little bit about the Chaostola skipper, the skipper moth, and this is potential habitat foraging for endangered swift parrot as well. I couldn't find a population figure for the moth. It's very low, it's endangered. But this, as potential habitat for the swift parrot in the urban corridor, the swift parrot is rarer than the orangutan, it's rarer than the black rhino, the swift parrot is rarer than the panda. And it says on the Tasmanian Government website under the threatened species link, quote, urbanisation is the major cause of local extinctions of the Chaostola skipper. Many of those areas are now largely subdivided into small residential blocks. So that's the context around why it's important that we maintain habitat in urban areas for threatened and endangered species. There were 19 representations opposing this proposal. Things like traffic and pedestrian cycling issues are noted, the usual issues that we often talk about, and the Mayor does a great job at raising the salience of this issue. Disability access. You know, we need to start building our communities to be universally accessible for everyone. It doesn't just benefit people living in the disability community, it benefits all people, you know, frail people, people pushing prams, of course. And yes, as we've heard on this and others, yes, this type of dwelling that's proposed does suit some families, and Kingborough does indeed, of course, need to be providing a range of housing stock, increasing the housing stock, and you can see that in the local area objectives, the implementation strategies, the future character statements all say this, that we need to be increasing density close to shops, we need to have multi-unit housing. But it's all about the type of multi-unit housing, isn't it? And it's all about to what extent we all announce our displeasure with the planning scheme, but we actually can't fix the planning scheme from this chamber. And yes, if the planning scheme is the bare minimum, the least we could expect of our proponents and the proposals that we assess, the least we could expect is that they will comply with the planning scheme. That's all we're asking, is that they comply. And the removal of trees in this circumstance does not comply with the planning scheme. At page 61, quote, provided the loss of 24 high conservation value trees is offset, the proposed development is therefore considered to meet the performance criteria. However, at page 67, it's based on performance criteria P1. Quote, A, it is demonstrated that there are no feasible alternative proposal designs which could be implemented to avoid impacting on the tree, and the proposed methodology of the works incorporates measures to minimise and mitigate any damage to the tree. So again, we're told by planning staff on this occasion that it does meet performance criteria P1 because there are apparently no feasible alternatives. But if we turn our attention to the map that's on, or the diagram rather, on page 82, for example, you can see that the majority of the high conservation value trees are in that middle section there where the blue kind of stage 2 and stage 3 houses are. And again, I just simply don't accept the notion that every feasible opportunity was looked into. I respectfully disagree with the assessment that there is no feasible alternative to this proposal that could retain trees. By my view, an alternative exists. On page 82, you can see in that middle chunk of the proposed development, that's where you could save those trees. And you would just have to slightly amend the plans. But, you know, the proponent has chosen not to amend the plans. They only took away 4 of the proposed dwellings. And now we're left with 24 high conservation value trees to be taken away. So on 10.4.2 P4, the proponent has chosen not to comply, despite approving.
Time.
And so I will be voting against it. Thanks.
Thank you. Are there any further contributions? If not, I'll ask.
I have a question.
Oh,
Some more
sorry,
questions.
Councillor Midgley.
Thank you, Mayor. In regards to what Councillor Cordova shared in regards to the trees and perhaps the possibility of retaining the middle section, I'm wondering if Ms Tyler Moore has any comments in regards to that.
Ms Tyler Moore.
Through you, Mayor, unfortunately I wasn't in the discussions. I'd have to look at the file to see what the record was about discussions with respect to that middle part and the trees.
Mayor, that just
yes.
makes it difficult for me at the moment to be able to make a decision on this, to see if there could have been a possibility in regards to the retainment.
Well, we have
this
to.
area, but
The issue that we have is that we have to consider the application that is before us at the moment. So it's sort of a hypothetical question in one sense. Ms Tyler Moore's not able to provide that detail as she wasn't the assessing planning officer. So unless you have another question, we need to... Oh, sorry. Ms Tyler Moore.
Sorry, through you, Mayor. I don't have an answer about whether there was a discussion about the middle part. Like I said, I have to look at the council records. But part of the discussion on page 66 that the officers included, the environmental officer is included in the report, does give some explanation as to why that the vegetation has been pushed really hard to be retained, which I can assure you does not come lightly to our environmental planners. They talk about the poor condition of the values, lack of management options. There's also the bushfire. So under the planning scheme, as the councillors would now be quite well aware of, there's a number of exemptions regarding vegetation removal. The exemptions at the front of the end of the scheme trump other parts of the planning scheme. So this is a bushfire site as well. It's a bushfire prone area, which whilst, just to complicate things, whilst we don't assess the bushfire unless it's subdivision in units, it will come up as the need to achieve BAL requirements under the building permit. So we proactively look at the bushfire requirements when we do the planning applications to know what will be cleared. And that does obviously have impacts on what can be retained in terms of vegetation.
Thank you. Could I please just have some understanding and explanation then what that means, given the poor condition of the values, the lack of management options and the small size of the patch? If you could just expand on that a bit more for me, please. Through you, Mayor.
Ms Tyler Moore.
Through you, Mayor, I don't want to completely answer what the officers were looking at. I haven't read the supporting reports that went with it. Generally, the comments around that would be to do with the poor condition of the values, that may have something to do with the maturity or how well they've grown, or whether they've been stunted over time, whether they have the ability to grow into a mature forest that's really going to offer that. I'm not saying that is the case for this. It comes with the disclaimer that I haven't read the environmental report that was supported with the application, but that is generally what we talk about, the condition of values. It might also to do with weed infestation or other damage that has occurred over time, because perhaps the area has been quite badly damaged in the past, which occurs on some sites where they've tilled the area and things like that in the past. The lack of management options and the small size of the patch. So they must see that, yes, you might have a patch, but is it really conducive to what they're trying to achieve if it's completely surrounded by urban environment around that? Is it enough to save it, or is it better to get the offset and spend it on an area where there'll be a greater net value to the community, to Kingborough, by preserving those areas?
Any further questions, Councillor Midgley? No? Otherwise, Councillor Street, would you like to close the debate?
Only to say that I appreciate the contributions from my colleagues, but still believe that the proposal meets the requirements of the planning scheme, and I will be voting in favour of it.
Thank you. The motion is that it is a development application for 55 multiple dwellings and demolition of existing dwelling, including stormwater and sewer infrastructure, at 70 Channel Highway and 6 Breezer Court, Kingston, for All Urban Planning Proprietary Limited, and there are 23 conditions attached. It was moved by Councillor Street, seconded by Councillor Westwood. All those in favour? Against? Division required. All those in favour? All those in favour are Councillor Wass, Midgley, Gladewright, Fox, Street, Bastone, Westwood and Reet. Those against, Councillor Cordova. The motion is carried.
Mayor, for the record, it's 51 units. You mistakenly said 55.
Sorry, did I say 55?
You took it from the heading, not from the approval.
Beg your pardon. Thank you. Okay, the Planning Authority adjourns. Open session of council recommences at 6:57 p.m. I'm advised by Mrs. Morton that we should probably take our break now, because we've also come to the notices of motion, so it would be appropriate that we have it now. So I propose that we try and keep it to 15 minutes, so we're not keeping our public gallery or anybody else waiting for too long. So if we could reconvene pretty promptly at 7:15, that would be appreciated. for us taking 5 minutes longer. There was a queue for the ladies' bathroom, as there generally is in most places. Can I just confirm that the recording is back on? Thank you. So we have recommenced the open session of council at 7:19 p.m. We move now to page 128. It's a notice of motion from Councillor Cordova, but I understand that that notice of motion has been withdrawn. Could you
I would like to withdraw it, yes, I confirm.
Thank you. In that case, we move to page 130. We have another notice of motion submitted by Councillor Cordova. It is headed Writing to the Minister regarding the Health and Environmental Services bylaw. There is an officer's response from Mr Basham. So Councillor Cordova is moving. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Midgley. Councillor Cordova.
Thank you very much, Mayor. So the context around this is that Part 7, Clause 25, removal of trees on private property, from the former Health and Environmental Services bylaw that Kingborough Council had, was deemed to be, or legal advice was received that it was in contravention or in conflict with the planning scheme. And the reason that my understanding is that one of the main reasons why it's purportedly in conflict with the planning scheme, according to legal experts, is because of IPD4. And this is largely a state government created problem. IPD4 was passed, I believe, in February of 2021. So this is Interim Planning Directive number 4, Exemptions, Application Requirements, Special Provisions and Zone Provisions, which came into effect on the 22nd of February. Local councils, in my opinion, should be able to make decisions around bylaws for the good governance of their municipality. And unfortunately, in my opinion, the state government has been over time making a concerted effort to withdraw the amount of power that local governments have and to centralise or consolidate the head of power within the state government. And so we get decisions like IPD4, which, according to legal experts, has limited or constrained a local council's ability to make decisions in the best interests of their own citizens. And of course, if you're in Westbury, the people of Westbury have a different set of needs and requirements in their local area as somebody in Huonville. And that's okay. And that's the role and the purpose of local government, is to be able to have that local knowledge and make those decisions in the best interests of their community. And so what I would like to see happen, and what I'm recommending in this motion tonight, is that because, according to our legal advice, it was essentially the fault of the state government in the provisions accorded to them by IPD4, because they kind of created this, I would like us to write to the Planning Minister and seek a solution. And so we have received 184 submissions about this Health and Environmental Services bylaw, which is an enormous number, from the community saying that they want Kingborough Council to have bylaws that protect trees on private property, or at least make stipulations about trees on private property. 184 people wanted us to do something about it, and we've heard that it's the state government that's constraining us from doing something about it. So I'd like us to write to the state government, to the Planning Minister, to seek a solution. Thank you.
Councillor Gladwright.
Thank you. Am I allowed to ask a question of Councillor Cordova?
Yep.
Yes. Thank you. Councillor Cordova, I'm with you with the sentiment, but I think your timing is all out, because we haven't yet received the third legal opinion. And so if that third legal opinion comes back and says that it's not contrary, then why write the letter? So my question is, can you address that, please?
Councillor Cordova.
I thank you. I thank the Councillor Gladwright for her question. And what we need to do is to try every avenue and every possibility to protect trees in Kingborough. And this is just one mechanism to do that. And in the resolution, it provides for 2 weeks within this resolution to convey this position. I would hope that we will move precipitously to seek senior council's advice on whether or not the tree bylaw is in conflict with the planning scheme. I think there's other issues with IPD4 as well, but at this stage, this is just one tool in our armamentarium, one option that we have to send a clear message rather than just in the confines of this chamber talking about how talking about our displeasure with the planning scheme. This is actually taking some step to remedying that.
Okay. While I completely support what you're trying to do here, I can't support this because I think that we need to wait for the third legal opinion first.
Thank you. Are there any further speakers on the motion? Are you all in a food coma? No further speakers. All right. Well, I will just make a brief contribution. I will be supporting this motion. I do believe that we should be drawing this matter to the attention of the state government because it seems, as we've heard tonight in our considerations as a planning authority, there are a range of implications of interim planning directive number 4 that was issued in February. And look, I'll be honest, I'm not hopeful that we're going to get a very positive response, but it is the first step in having the state government sit up and listen. And if we don't get an acceptable outcome through this, I believe we should perhaps take a motion to a legat meeting and try and pursue it through there, because you know the playing field was changed in February with the stroke of a pen, and I find that totally unacceptable because it is all of us who sit around this table and our communities who are then left with a bit of a mess as a result, and it is out of our hands. So I would like to see us write this letter and take it as the first step in the process. Councillor Cordova, did you want to close the motion?
Thank you, Mayor. Just to say that 184 submissions is such a significant number that the people of Kingborough have sent us as a council a message, and I think we need to react accordingly. We need to show that we have listened to the community and we will react to the community in a spirit of goodwill and listening to what they want. And so I acknowledge that even if it comes back from Senior Council that in fact it was all a misunderstanding and our bylaw is actually totally fine, I still think we need to send a message to the state government that we have concerns. We want the state government to be agile and to listen to our concerns when we have them. Thanks.
Thank you. I'll put the motion now. It is moved by Councillor Cordova. It's seconded by Councillor Midgley, and that we write to the Minister regarding the Health and Environmental Services bylaw. All those in favour? Against? Division is required. All those in favour? It's Councillors Cordova, Midgley, Fox, Bastone, Westwood and Reet. Those against? Councillors Wass, Gladeright and Street. The motion is carried. We move now to page 132, to petitions still being actioned. A report on the petition headed Public Furniture at Tinderbox will be provided at a future council meeting. Petitions received in the last period. At the time of the agenda was compiled, no petitions had been received. We turn now to page 133, Officers' Reports to Council, and the item is the Making of Bylaws. There's a recommendation on page 138. Do I have a mover? Councillor Street, and a seconder, Councillor Westwood. Councillor Street.
Thank you, Mayor. I move the motion for the Making of Bylaws after an extensive review process by this council, led by staff and led ably by Council's Officer Mr Scott Basham, and I thank him and staff for the work that they have done with respect to this matter. There have been literally hundreds of representations to Council on these bylaws, and I thank each and every one of the representatives for their feedback on them. It comes as no surprise to anybody who has taken an interest in this matter that the majority of those submissions were in relation to the Health and Environmental Services bylaw, and in particular one section of the Health and Environmental Services bylaw. That part of the Health and Environmental Services bylaw is bylaw 7 with respect to the removal of vegetation and the protection of vegetation. It has been now well canvassed by this council that in order to have these bylaws made, they must be certified by a legal practitioner as being lawful and in accordance with the law. On this occasion, council solicitors were not able to do that with respect to bylaw 7 and provided legal advice to council with respect to that bylaw and its lawfulness. They have not been able to certify that bylaw and as such it hasn't been included. Thankfully, I think given the significant public interest in the matter, there is a part of the recommendation that will require council to seek advice from senior counsel regarding that part of the bylaw to ensure that, that council's advice from our current solicitors is adequate in that matter, and I think that's a reasonable position to take. And then revisiting of the matter at a further date if that's deemed necessary once we get that advice. As it stands, council has little option but to go ahead this evening and make that bylaw. To not do so would mean that the current Health and Environmental Services bylaw would lapse and none of the rest of that bylaw would exist. So if we were to not make the Health and Environmental Services bylaw on the basis that we left that part out, then that would obviously not be a good outcome this evening. Mayor, I again thank staff for the thorough consultation process that they've gone through on this matter, and I commend the motion to council.
Councillor Cordova.
Thank you, Mayor. I would like to start by moving an amendment, if that's okay, to add on page 139 under the recommendation to add a clause D, and that clause D would say, "Will use the new legal advice to consider alternative tree protections, such as a tree bylaw or an alternative solution to the regulation of vegetation removal that is exempt or no permit required under the planning scheme within 12 months of this motion passing."
Thank you. So I will just first of all check whether we might be able to do this a bit quicker if that amendment is acceptable to the mover and seconder of the motion.
It is.
Thank you. So the motion, with their permission now, becomes that D becomes part of the substantive motion. Did you want to make your contribution now?
Could I make a point of order?
Of course. Councillor Fox.
It's kind of not a point of order, but I thought the word consider was going to be in this clause in the first paragraph, that we will use the new legal advice to consider undertaking alternative tree protection.
Sorry, could we just see what's yeah, that's, we'll use the new legal to consider tree provisions, that's what it says. Well, it's acceptable to the mover and the seconder, so we'll proceed on that basis that they're happy with that. But, you know, you can make in your contribution, Councillor Fox, you can have that, but we'll move to Councillor Cordova on the substantive motion.
Thank you, Mayor. I would like to start by thanking all of the people in the Kingborough community who participated in this public consultation process about our bylaws and who had their say. It's a terrific testament to, you know, the freedom that we have, the democracy that we have, that people take an interest. And I think now there is a significant, or I think it would be very difficult to say that council does not have a popular mandate to make provisions around trees on private property. The legalities and the technical legal aspects aside, there's a popular will, I think, that's been demonstrated by the 184 people who wrote in saying that they want to make sure that trees are protected. I would like to thank Jill Hickey, the Taroona Environment Network, the many, many community groups who got involved, and to every single individual who wrote their feelings about these bylaws, to people like Robin O'Connor, who wrote the Kingborough Chronicle, to all those people who got involved and had their say. So for context, we got one set of legal advice that said the tree protections were that existed within the health bylaw were in conflict with the planning scheme. Then we got another bit of legal advice from the Environmental Defender's Office that said the opposite. Then a barrister has now been brought on who has kind of confirmed to some extent, my understanding is that the EDO, the Environmental Defender's Office advice. All of this, I'm thankful that the council has listened, that we wanted a new set of legal advice. We wanted somebody independent, a third kind of arbiter to mediate this. You know, when one law firm says one thing and another law firm says another, who's going to mediate that? Well, we cast our eyes to points B on page 139, that this resolution here will get a senior counsel to look into Part 7, Clause 25 of the bylaw and make that determination. And I think that that really shows that council listened, that we saw 184 people had these really strong feelings, the community group, so many people, and council listened and reacted. I'm so grateful that we're in a council that is able to react when the community raises their voice about something to which they're so passionate about. On the other bylaws, I think it's really important that basically, for context, you know, we're now in a scenario where the bylaws have expired and we do have these statutory obligations, and we do need to make sure that we have robust bylaws, and the changes that have been made I feel confident about. So really the main issue here was that of the Part 7 Clause 25 of the bylaws, and I'm really pleased that under the recommendations that have been provided, we will get independent senior counsel advice, and if the advice confirms my feeling, which is that the Environmental Defender's Office were correct, then we will see within 12 months either a tree bylaw or at least a draft of a tree bylaw. And if the senior counsel disagrees with me and disagrees with the Environmental Defender's Office, then at least we will seek alternatives. And within 12 months, we will see alternatives drafted that will regard the regulation of vegetation removal that's exempt or no permit required under the scheme from senior counsel. So I think this is a great middle ground. The council has listened, and I look forward to protecting the trees of Kingborough for generations to come. Thanks.
Councillor Westwood, I think you had your light on earlier, yeah? And then Councillor Midgley.
Thank you, Mayor. I echo the sentiments of Councillor Street. We have before us 4 bylaws that have expired. They contain a number of things that relate to a lot of different things. I know the focus has been on the removal of Part 7, but I think we need to separate the 2 issues, and we need to pass the bylaws tonight so that we can regulate activities in our municipality. And I was just looking through before the marine facilities bylaw. Peaceful use of a marine facility. A person must not do any act or thing which unreasonably interferes or is likely to interfere with the peaceful use by the public of a marine facility. Health and Environmental Services bylaw. Dangerous substances. A person must not place in any wheelie bin anything or substance that is hot or is likely to become hot, may or is likely to explode. And it goes on. The Parks, Recreation and Natural Areas bylaw. A person must not urinate or decapitate on or in any council land or recreational facility except in a place provided for that purpose. And as you can see from our agenda papers, there are many, many more examples of things that we really need to be able to have a piece of legislation that regulates, and given the bylaws are expired, I strongly think that we need to pass the 4 bylaws tonight and deal with the issue of Part 7, and I'm supportive of the proposal by Councillor Cordova in his proposed amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Westwood. Councillor Midgley.
Thank you, Mayor. I also echo the sentiments to the high number of people, and probably the highest, I would say, that we've ever received for a bylaw review. I'm sure staff can correct me if I am wrong, but I really do thank everybody who put in a representation. These do take time. It is really great to know that people do listen and are aware of what's happening around council and discussions that we make, and I note that this could have easily slipped through without people being aware of. So thanks also for staff, and particular Councillor Cordova, for doing some work in regards to this matter, to highlighting that this was coming forward. it also gives great knowledge, I think, for us as councillors sitting here, that the community really values trees and vegetation and the importance of this to our community and our growing community. I would like to know, Mayor, if staff would like to highlight any updates or changes, or I guess highlights from our discussions in workshops in regards to the bylaw, if they would like to.
Anyone? Anyone open for bidding? No, no, no. That looks like a no. But thank you for asking them. I think that's what they wanted me to pass on. Do I have any further speakers on the motion? Councillor Gladright.
Thank you. Start with a question. I'd just like to know, please, how we go about choosing who's going to offer the third legal opinion.
I'll ask the Acting General Manager to address that. Mr. Smee.
Thank you, Mayor. We would look to engage someone who's completely independent, and I'd suggest we'd look to a senior counsel residing in the north of the state who has absolutely no ties to Kingborough Council whatsoever.
And do we know any expected costs for that legal advice?
Mr. Smee.
Through you, Mayor, not at this stage, no.
Okay, thank you. I would just like to acknowledge quite a few things, actually. Firstly, Mayor, your advocacy for getting the third legal opinion brought towards us tonight, in front of us tonight. I would also like to acknowledge the staff. This is a really, really complex issue, and so thank you for taking the time to meet with me and answer lots of my emails about this. And yeah, it's really important that we acknowledge as well the community's advocacy in this area as well. So I also think that it's important that our bylaws are enforceable, so I will be supporting this motion tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Fox.
Well, I would echo all those sentiments, and I also particularly would like to thank the community associations who have rallied behind us on this. And I think it shows that there is a very strong feeling from the north of our municipality right through to the south on vegetation protection and the wonderful work that council has done, and that we are now feeling is threatened. And I know that we employ a lot of staff who work in this area. There's a lot of angst in the council staff as well, and I think it's wonderful to see so many individual residents writing into us and expressing their concerns. It's very fulfilling to read those emails, and I really hope that the independent advice comes up with the answer. And I also would like to thank Mr. Councillor Cordova for putting the motion that we write to the Minister, because I think it's, to this community, it's an important issue and we need support from all areas. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further speakers? If not, I'll make a contribution briefly just before asking Councillor Street to close the debate. I'm pleased we've been able to land at this point, at this stage. I think if we think back to a few weeks ago and one of the workshops that we had, we probably thought, oh, we don't know what the future of the bylaws are. So I think in that few weeks, from what has been, when we started months ago, been a very complex issue, I feel like we've come to a position now that we can all live with, and I do hope that we get the clarity that we need from the legal advice, but also I really hope that there is a mechanism that we can have moving forward that will provide the protection that the community has told us that they wish for trees in our municipality. But I do need to say, as has been said earlier this evening, that the problem with this is it lies at the feet of the state government, and up until February of this year, when the interim planning directive was issued, this was not a concern. and it became a concern following that. And so, once again, it is the state government almost hanging us out to dry as a council, and I find that really abhorrent, and I hope we get a good response to our letter, but if we do not, then I think that we really need to send a very, very strong message to the state government about the lack of consultation with not just our council but others who have had a range of impacts from IPD4. So having said that, I will ask Councillor Street if you would like to close the debate. No, closed. So the motion before us that is moved by Councillor Street and seconded by Councillor Westwood is the amended motion, parts A, B, C and D. I won't read it all in, but it's there printed on the screen. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried unanimously. Thank you. We move now to page 263. That's a big leap through the agenda. The item is request for consent to build outside a building envelope on sealed plan number 151796 at 290 Cayuta Road, Cayuta, with a recommendation on page 266. Do I have a mover and a seconder for that motion? Please. Councillor Street and Councillor Fox. Councillor Street, doing the heavy lifting.
Thank you, Mayor. From time to time, Council will get a motion such as this, where there's a covenant on title requiring development to be within a certain building envelope, unless otherwise allowed by Council or consented to by Council. This is one of those occasions. In this circumstance, as the report makes clear, the building envelope in question is not entirely appropriate for residential development. And we're in a circumstance where, because the subject lot's 24 hectares in area and the current building envelope's only 331 square metres of that, there is an opportunity there for the owner of that lot to potentially build in a different location, but one that also doesn't impact or minimises the impact on the surrounding property, which is generally the reason why these building envelopes are put in place in the first instance. You'll note from the report and from the recommendation of staff that while we would be consenting to building outside the building envelope, the final location and design of any proposed buildings that the owner wishes to construct are still going to be subject to a full assessment against the planning scheme requirements. And under those requirements, the degree of encroachment outside the building envelope should be, under the recommendation, the degree of encroachment outside the building envelope should be minimised. We, as I understand it, pretty much have full discretion with respect to whether we will give consent on matters such as these or not. I think this is one circumstance where we should do that, and as I've already said, one of the key reasons why that's the case is because this is a very, very large piece of land in relative terms, and provided that the encroachment outside the building envelope is minimal, if we can ease some of the requirements on the owner so that they can have sensitive residential development on that site, then I think we should do that.
Thank you, Councillor Street. Are there any further speakers on the motion? If not, I'll put the motion that is moved by Councillor Street, seconded by Councillor Fox, that the request for consent to build outside a building envelope on sealed plan number 151796 at 290 Cayuta Road, Cayuta, be recommended as per the recommendation printed on the screen. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried unanimously. We move now to page 269, the Kingborough Aquatic Feasibility, the Kingborough Aquatic Facility Feasibility Report, with a recommendation on page 273. Do I have a mover and a seconder? Councillor Westwood, and seconded by Councillor Midgley. Councillor Westwood.
Thank you, Mayor. This has generated a lot of debate over the last, well, I was going to say a few days, but really it's been a large number of years. In my time on council, early last year, we passed a future directions plan for the Kingborough Sports Precinct, and that did include in it an aspirational vision for an aquatic centre. There is a huge amount of interest within our community for this type of facility. I've been driving 4 kids up and down the outlet to the Hobart Aquatic Centre for a number of years, and would also very much like the option of attending a local pool. Unfortunately, the pool is not affordable. The estimated cost is calculated to be about $40.5 million, plus the cost to relocate a number of existing facilities at the sports centre that are currently there. That's another $4.5 million. So to put that into perspective, that's roughly 2 to 3 times council's annual capex. So there would be nothing else that we could possibly do if we were to divert that expenditure to build an aquatic facility. The annual net operating cost has also been calculated to be between $700,000 and $750,000, depending on the management model. And this equates roughly to an increase in the general rate of 3%. I know some people are happy to pay an extra 3% in their rates for the convenience and the for the convenience of having an aquatic facility in our municipality, but I'm also aware that there are a number of people who aren't willing to pay an extra increase in their rates. I guess if we could somehow magically find the $40.5 million plus the $4.5 to relocate the existing facilities, then I would, I think, support looking into increasing rates, because I really would love a pool in our local area, and I would certainly use a pool. I think given the large number of families that we have, a lot of families would use a pool for play and for exercise and for learn to swim programs. But until we somehow receive a lovely gift wrapped in a bow, or we win the lotto or something, it's simply not affordable. And so I disappointingly agree with the recommendation that we use the feasibility study as the basis for future planning, and we pursue opportunities with the state government to address the provision of an aquatic facility within the context of a regional strategic approach. I think this is a sensible way forward. There are a lot of people who live in the Huon who would also like to use a pool, and whilst we don't probably total the optimal population of 100,000 people per pool, there are certainly benefits to the southern region having its own aquatic facility. So I support the recommendation, and I'll be interested to hear from my colleagues.
Thank you. Councillor Midgley.
Thank you, Mayor. I feel like I'm just asking a lot of questions tonight.
That's all right. You're most welcome to.
Thank you. So I'd like a bit of background in regards to the brief provided for the feasibility study. I understand it is a bit in the report, but perhaps for the community as well, for them to understand what the brief involved, and especially in relation to the fact that we really only have one option, and there is much more leniency towards the 25 metre versus a 50 metre, and just to unpack that for us all to understand and for the community to understand.
I'll ask the Acting General Manager to address that. Mr. Smee.
Thank you, Mayor. So the brief provided to the consultant was to come up with a design for a facility based within the Kingborough Sports Precinct, and the direction for the sports precinct came out of the future directions plan, and the design was to reflect engagement with the community in relation to both specific stakeholders and the broader community, and you'll see within the report that there is been provided all of the details in relation to the stakeholders that were consulted and the more broader community engagement. There were 92 individual submissions received, and there were over 900 responses to our online survey. So the brief to the consultant was to come up with a facility that reflected the desires of the community and were also reflective of the size and scale of the Kingborough population. There were some other considerations provided in the brief, and they are detailed in the introduction to the report, and they relate to the benefits that a facility can provide both within the precinct and to the broader community. The educational aspect, bearing in mind that we do have a high school located within the precinct, and to come up with the detailed costings around the design that had been provided as being the optimum design solution based on the feedback from the community. So all of that involved a substantial amount of consultation, design work on behalf of engineers and architects to come up with that solution. In relation to the question of why weren't alternate options considered, the brief was very much around responding to what the community had said that they wanted to see and an optimum solution provided to that.
Thank you. Councillor Midgley.
Thank you very much for that understanding and summary. And I guess it would have been difficult to, because there is still community sentiment for a 50-metre pool, and how the consultant decided that the 25-metre with all the other hydrotherapy and the other, bits that are there. A lot of people are discussing to myself and emails and social media around that, the 50-metre pool without all the sort of add-ons and things like that. It must have been really difficult, I guess, for the consultant to come up with that. And in regards to a engagement process, Mayor, and through you, Mayor, Mr. Smee, we have had discussions around community engagement, and we've engaged with, as you said, 292 people, and I think it was 900 I wrote down. That's quite a lot of people who commit their time and have a conversation, and then sort of some time passes. We have a big report that's full of quite a lot of information, really, that you have to sift through. And there's no sort of like small executive sort of a summary to really kind of cut to the nitty-gritty around what the consultants come with. It comes to us as a council agenda. You have to find the feasibility study on the web. I'm just sort of missing a little bit of that, how we close that loop in consultation with the community, and how can we left this kind of gap in regards to actually going back and thanking them for the responses, and this is a bit of what it's come up with, and then bring it to council. If you can just explain that to me, please.
Mr. Smee.
Through you, Mayor, I guess the thinking of staff in relation to that has been we need to get the direction of council in relation to their response to this feasibility report before we go to the community and say what we intend to do with this report. So at this stage, it's only been provided on our website as part of the agenda papers. We will now take it from here to do a communication with the community in relation to the status of the report, what it means, what the implications are, what council intends to do with it, and indeed we can prepare an executive summary for those people that don't want to wade through 100 pages. So very much our thinking has been we don't want to preempt or second guess how council will respond to this. We wanted to get the direction from council tonight, and then we'll go out to the community and say this is the feasibility report and this is how council intends to deal with it.
Thank you. So if then so the report is noted and the feasibility, is noted, and that council has this recommendation, but yet the community still isn't happy with the outcome, with the fact that it is a 25-metre pool, and the community sentiment is that a 50-metre pool would be better. What happens, I guess, in that instance, if there is a big community outcry around that?
Mr. Smee. Too many lights on. Can someone... I've got Councillor Fox and Street.
Through you, Mayor, I guess the first point I'd make in relation to a 50-metre pool is it only is of benefit to that section of the community that want to do 50-metre lap swimming. What the consultation has told us is that there's a whole range of other aquatic facility needs that aren't simply a 50-metre pool. However, what we have said is we're going to use this, and in our recommendation is we'll use this report as the basis for future planning. That's not to say that we would discount a 50-metre pool in the future. It's that we will use this as the basis. And the advice in this report is that you need a population of 100,000 people to justify having a 50-metre pool. So I guess that would be our starting point, but if this recommendation is adopted tonight, we wouldn't be ruling anything in or out. We're just saying that we have received from an expert consultant, and I would point out that this is arguably the best consultant in Australia, has provided us with expert advice, and we will take this expert advice and use it going forward.
Councillor Midgley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Smee. That provides a lot more thorough understanding in regards to where council sits in regards to this. And I guess in the point B, pursues opportunities with the state government, I mean, that is very open-ended. I'm sure that it will be part of the whole sports precinct conversation, and when there are federal and state elections, or perhaps, who knows, a special fund to fund aquatic centres, I'm sure that we'll have council staff pursuing these as we see fit, and it's great to hear that we aren't just set in stone to this actual outcome of this feasibility study, that the community will still continue to be engaged and involved if there happens to be $40 million coming our way. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I had next on my list Councillor Fox, then Councillor Street, then Councillor Bastone, then Councillor Cordova.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to point out that 30 years ago we did a study very similar to this, and we had the expert of the day come from Victoria and do it for us, and came up with exactly the same answer, that a 25-metre pool with other facilities for people with hydrotherapy and play areas, especially for children, attracted 80% of the population, including children and grandparents, whereas lap swimmers is a very small part of the population. It's less than 5%. And a 50-metre pool would be more, not just double the cost of a 25-metre pool, but nearly 3 times the cost. So it's just not affordable for this community. It wasn't then, and it isn't now. I'm surprised the price is so high, 40 million. In 30 years, it was 1.2 million, but I guess the price of money has gone up now too, so the value of money. But I do recommend that we pursue this motion, because I think the original suggestion of having the pool at this point in time up at the sports centre was from the Education Department and the Minister, because they want to make the Kingston High School a sports-based school, and this is an important part of that. And I think if anybody can afford it, we can't at this level, but maybe the state and federal government can find grants or whatever money in their budgets, especially around election time, to contribute to our community in this way. I think it's high time Kingborough had a swimming pool that was a public pool, and one that the whole community can enjoy throughout the year, not just a open air pool, but enclosed so that they can swim in winter as well in summer. and the amount of children who die from drowning. It's so important that children in our community learn to swim, and that we don't have to compete with cars on the southern outlet after school or even during school times to learn to swim. They should be doing that in our own community in a pool that we have access to without using transport on the southern outlet. So I just hope that by going down this route there will be progress eventually. It's taken 30 years to do nothing. And I guess the study has proven there still is a demand, there still is a requirement for a pool, and we now at least have a current up-to-date baseline study which hopefully will help the government in making that decision too. So I recommend the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fox. Councillor Street.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, I wasn't going to amend the motion, but I think on the basis of some conversations that we had during the break, I would like to do that, and Ms Morton has some wording for this that's been emailed to her. Mayor, I'd like to move that we add a C. Acknowledges council is unable to construct an aquatic facility of this size within its existing budget, and resolves to lobby the state and federal governments for financial support towards such a project.
I don't think Ms Morton has it from the look on her face at the moment.
No.
So you might just need to...
So C acknowledges council is unable to construct an aquatic facility of this size within its existing budget, and resolves to lobby the state and federal governments for financial support towards such a project.
Is that... so Councillor, it was moved by Councillor Westwood and seconded by Councillor Midgley. Is that acceptable to both of you as an amendment? Thank you. Councillor Midgley is the seconder. Are you happy with that amendment? So we'll take it as part of that motion. So Councillor Street, if you could continue.
Thank you, Mayor. A lot of what needs to be said about this report has already been said. The astronomical construction cost is one thing, but the ongoing cost of maintaining and operating the facility is a completely different thing as well. It is a large amount of money required to keep a facility like this going. And I think one of the greatest myths that's been debunked by the expert that we engaged to conduct the review was that a centre of this type could ever be profitable and stand on its own 2 feet. It was the advice from Sea Leisure that essentially there is one facility of this type in the country that breaks even. That was a shock to me, and I think it would be a shock to most people who've been supportive of an aquatic facility in Kingborough that's the case. And certainly I think it's probably the biggest myth that I've heard in the engagement through this process is that a facility like this could ever break even. There is going to be a financial impact somewhere. The reason that I've moved C is because I don't believe that council has the financial ability to sustain either the construction costs or that ongoing cost on its own. But I think it's reasonable considering the significant interest from our ratepayers in having a facility like this, that we do have a conversation with state and federal governments about opportunities for funding such a project going forward. I think that's a reasonable step to take, and I think it's a step that the community would expect of us after going to the extent of having the study done and getting these findings. But I also think it's important to acknowledge to the community very clearly that this is not a project that we're ever going to be able to undertake on our own. It's simply too expensive, both in upfront construction costs and ongoing costs. So I think it's important that we acknowledge that up front, but that we will do what we can to lobby for support to make it a reality. The potential result of us going ahead to construct such a facility without that support is simply too great an impost on ratepayers, in my view, regardless of how great the community sentiment is. So I'm more than happy to vote in favour of this amended motion and ensure that we continue the conversation and continue to lobby higher levels of government for that support. But again, I think we need to make it clear that this is not something that council is ever going to be able to go alone on.
Thank you, Councillor Street, Councillor Bastone, and then Councillor Cordova.
Thank you. While I agree that we will never be able to go it alone, I think we need to look at the fact that the high school does want to set up as a sports specialist high school. And we already have an arts theatre building that we share with them, which is on the high school grounds, but as Kingborough citizens, we have the right to use it, or more than that. I think if we look at the running costs, we would be able to look at part of those being paid for by the high school, who would be using it quite a lot. There are 16 public pools in Tasmania, not all of them indoors, but when we have a look, Smithton, Devonport, Georgetown, Huon, Clarence, Burnie, Glenorchy, Launceston, Ulverston, Queenstown, Cressy, Deloraine, Riverside, Ross, Scottsdale, no Kingborough. I've been a swimming mum all the time my children were young. They swam in a 25-metre pool and went on to swim in the Australian Championships. 25-metre pools are not, 50-metre pools are not necessary. We have world short course competitions. Lots and lots and lots of our champion swimmers train in a 25-metre pool. It's not essential to have a 50-metre pool for us to have our own Adriana Titmus living here in Kingston. But when you have to come from right down the Huon or all the way in from Woodbridge at 4:30 in the morning, it's a long way to travel into the Hobart Aquatic Centre. And I think we really should look at having, if nothing else, a 25-metre pool with all the bits. There's nothing wrong with a 25-metre pool. It's just if you give people options, they're always going to go for the Rolls Royce. And really sometimes a very nice electric Tesla will be just as good as a Rolls Royce. So I think we need a 25-metre pool.
Thank you. Councillor Cordova.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you to my colleague, Councillor Bastone. Well said. Well said. I think that we need to make it a priority. And when I heard that list of the 16 swimming pools, the 16 aquatic centres in Tasmania, it beggars belief. And we heard from the Acting General Manager that the council needs to provide, the councillors need to provide direction to the council on this. So let me provide my direction. Personally, I would like a staged construction of the aquatic centre. I would like to make it a priority. I think it is affordable if it is staged and if it is measured in some of those ways that Councillor Bastone articulated. We did hear from that consultant, Sea Leisure, and indeed one of the most credentialed consultants that one could find. And he told us that for every $1 invested in an aquatic centre, our council area would receive $8 in wellbeing benefits bestowed upon the community. The health and wellbeing benefits are significant. Now, the population of Devonport is 30,629, according to the ABS. Kingborough has 37,000 people. And in May of 2012, according to the Advocate newspaper, Voss Construction was awarded the tender to build Devonport's new $10 million indoor aquatic centre following discussion at their council meeting. The total capital expenditure of that project was $14 million, with federal and state government funds of $5 million each and a council contribution of $4 million. Even Oatlands is getting an aquatic centre. According to their website at the Southern Midlands Council, the total cost will be around $9 million, of which Council has already secured $4 million in grant funding from both the Australian and Tasmanian governments. Council contribution will come from the sale of existing property assets and a loan reflecting the long-term nature of that facility, and Southern Midlands Council has a 10-year financial strategy to absorb that cost, but it's hoped that attendees' increase and operational efficiencies are achieved. I was door-knocking during the council by-election, and as I talked about the need for Kingborough to have an aquatic centre, so many people said, oh, I remember council was going to do that 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. We should run a competition. Somebody told me about, maybe it was in the 80s, the early 80s, there was a buy a brick, some kind of buy a brick for the swimming pool project going on. We should run a competition for the earliest story in Kingborough about trying to get council to build an aquatic centre, because I heard stories going back to, I think maybe the 70s, maybe the 60s. People in this community have said this is a priority for them, and yet it's fallen on deaf ears at a council for like decade upon decade. Now, as I recall, for Kingston Park, as an example, we're paying about $1 out of every $4 of capital expenditure is going to Kingston Park in this financial year. More spending on Kingston Park than on stormwater for the entire municipality. We spend $1.3 million on turf maintenance every year at this council. So my point is not that we should stop funding Kingston Park or stop funding turf maintenance. It's just that if we have a plan amortised over 10 or 20 or 30 years, if we put this in our long-term financial plan and say, yes, we are going to listen to the community, just like we did about the bylaws, we know that the community feels that this has been a priority for decades, falling on deaf ears, and it's time to change. It's time to prioritise this, make it a staged development. It should be co-funded by the state and federal and council, and make it a 30-year plan. We need to make it a priority because it's only going to get nominally more expensive over time, but the real costs are being incurred right now, because for every $1 we invested in that aquatic centre, we'll get $8 in benefits returned. And what is the cost of not getting the next Ariana Titmus? What is the cost in health benefits for not having a pool? And what's the cost on all of our productivity of getting stuck on the southern outlet because of the traffic congestion, which is contributed to by so many people from our municipality and indeed Huon travelling to Hobart. Now, in this very extensive feasibility study, it made, as Councillor Bastone alluded to, kind of a set of Rolls-Royce assumptions, which were interesting and were good and were valid, but it doesn't really take into account the fact that if we are thoughtful, if we think outside the box, and if we plan for a staged development, we could do this right now. We could start right now. And if Oatlands can do it, then we can too. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers? Councillor Gladwright.
Thank you. Just a couple of questions. When it says pursues opportunities with the state government to address the provisions of aquatic facilities, are you able to give us some more information about what that is, please?
Mr. Smee.
Through you, Mayor, I guess there's a couple of issues there. One is looking at this at a regional level and saying, well, rather than every council trying to provide every element of an aquatic facility within their own area, can we look at this within a regional context and divide up those various elements and spread them out so that we have, for example, an acknowledgement that the Hobart Aquatic Centre is the competition-based facility and other areas, other municipal areas aren't going to try and compete with that, aren't going to try and duplicate the level of investment required to purely focus on competition. And I think this is something that we see a lot in our various councils. There is a desire for every council to want to have the best level of facility, and particularly in relation to competition. So there is that element of looking at a regional approach through the Department of Community Sport and Recreation that they play a lead role in looking at this at a state and regional level, rather than leaving it up to every individual council just to try and do it on their own without any heed to the municipal boundaries and population centres, etc. So there is that element. There is also the element that has been touched on, and that is the existence of the high school within the sports precinct and the substantial element of education that is linked to an aquatic facility, particularly the Learn to Swim that has been discussed tonight, and the opportunities that may exist to work with the state government in relation to coming up with the funds to build a facility that not only has a recreational element to it, but ticks off on that educational element, and as a number of councillors have noted tonight, does provide a significant opportunity due to the fact that we have the Kingston High School based within our Kingborough Sports Precinct.
So, have I got this right? I think you were saying before that Sea Leisure came up with this design because they were responding to what the community were saying. But were the community ever asked at all about the costs? So would you be happy with a facility if it was like this and we could afford it? That wasn't part of the questioning that was put out to the community, was it? It was just like, would you use this and would you use that and how about this flashy thing? And everyone's going, yes, that sounds amazing, we want that. And that's what has been designed here. Is that correct?
Mr. Smead.
Through you, Mayor, I guess there's a degree of chicken and egg here in that you can't go and ask the community how much would you be prepared to pay if you don't know what it's going to cost. So, you know, to a degree, the consultant has gone to the community and asked, what would you like to see? What would you use? But certainly the end product doesn't reflect a catch-all of everything the community want to see, because clearly there are people within our community that want to see a 50-metre pool, and that's not what's being recommended. So the consultant has come up with what, in his professional expert opinion, is the best model for the design of a facility to meet the needs of the community and the needs based on what are expressed through the consultation, but also on the size of the community, and that's based on his research throughout Australia in relation to facilities and population bases.
I'm just wondering how we can consider a downsized version of this. Like, this proposal includes an indoor spa and sauna, a creche, 3 retail outlets, commercial suites, multi-purpose rooms. Is there, I mean, are we able to obtain a business case for some of these other aquatic facilities in these much smaller towns? I've got the same list that Sue read out.
I think when we had the workshop, which obviously you weren't a member of council then, my understanding of why they added the additional things like the retail and the retail is like a cafe, but also the offices that could be used for massage therapists or physiotherapists and whatever, is to actually provide some additional revenue to help to sustain the centre. That was the thinking behind that, because of the running costs that have been demonstrated by, as Councillor Street mentioned, there is one swimming pool in the country that actually breaks even or makes a profit out of all the swimming pools in Australia. And yeah, we've had that demonstrated to us by the operational loss at the Aquatic Centre in Hobart. The Doon Kennedy Aquatic Centre is running at a loss. So I don't know whether Mr. Smee, you'd like to add anything to that?
Mayor, you've largely summed it up. The additional add-on facilities are very much about providing revenue opportunities that value add in terms of the financial viability of the facility. I think it's part of the research that has been provided suggests that cafes provide a significant revenue stream, much like a service station doesn't now rely on petrol sales for its primary source of income. It's what it sells through the shop. So yeah, the point that the consultant made was that if you start to take things off, you lose the economies of scale, and it in fact becomes a false economy. You reduce your capital, but you then increase your operational spend because you've lost revenue opportunities.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you for that explanation. Obviously, I can't support a facility that's going to hemorrhage so much money. So I just want to then ask a little bit more about this lobbying of the state and federal government. What does that look like?
Mr. Smee.
Through you, Mayor. Again, I guess it's on two levels. There's an approach that would come at officer level, and that would be to staff at the Department of Community Sport and Recreation, and that's about a conversation that does look to address this through a strategic state government-led process. And then there's the lobbying that will occur at a political level, and that's very much around election times. And inevitably there is a requirement to have a feasibility report, costings, and that's what this report has given us. So if nothing else, we are well prepared for that lobbying process, having gone through this exercise.
Okay, and then I just want to know about the communication then with the community around that lobbying and where we're going from here.
I think Mr. Smee might have answered that earlier in response to Councillor Midgley's question, but did you just want to recap what you said about sort of closing the loop on this?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Very much the intent after tonight. I know our communications advisor has got on the front foot and is preparing to send out a media release tomorrow that will be conveying to the community council's resolution of tonight and what we intend to do with this particular report. But obviously there will be ongoing communications beyond that do relate to the opportunities that arise through our conversations with the community sport and rec, with the state government, and as other opportunities arise, we are really mindful that this is something that's important to the community, that they don't simply want to see us have prepared this report and put it on the shelf, that there will be a desire to actually see us do something with it.
Thank you, that's excellent.
Thank you. Councillor Cordova, did you have a question?
A question, thank you, Mayor. And my question is about Devonport versus here. So I'll just give some context. The Aquatic Centre, which only cost $10 million in Devonport, has an 8-lane, 25-metre indoor pool heated to 28.5 degrees, warm water therapy pool heated to 34 degrees, indoor learn to swim heated to 32 degrees, shallow splash deck with water features. It's even got a giant inflatable feature on weekends, which sounds amazing.
Are you volunteering for that role?
A disabled changing facility and ramp access, so it's universal access, and it's got outdoors, an Olympic 50-metre heated pool, learn to swim heated pool, and a water slide. My question is, all of that was $10 million and it was this co-pro with federal and state. Trying to tease out from our report, why is our report so significantly more expensive when we have this tried and tested model already in Devonport?
Mr. Smee, do you want to tackle that one?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. If you look at the figures in the report, the actual build for this facility is $28 million. That's what the quantity surveyors have said is the cost of the build. Then there's a contingency in there, which every good project builds in a contingency, and then there's fit out etc. So, 40 million may well be an upper figure, but it's a figure that the consultant believes we should be looking at, and not wanting to undercook the figures. I'm really mindful that the costs of any building work, even in the past 12 months, have gone up dramatically. All of our building projects at the moment, A, we struggle to find a builder, and B, when we do, you only have to look at some of our capital projects to know that, some of them, what we costed 12 months ago, have had a 50%, 100% in some cases increase in the cost of building. So it is partly reflected of that. I'm not sure what year Devonport was constructed, but I'd suggest that the current building environment has significantly added to the costs of what it did when Devonport was done.
Thank you. And just a follow-up question, it was 2012, I think, was when it was. But a follow-up question is about, because we in terms of communications with the community, we definitely don't want to be seen, in my opinion, to be kicking this can down the road, as we heard from the Acting General Manager, that we don't want to put this thing on the shelf. We actually
I think you just stole that line from the Premier.
Right. But we want to progress it, and I'm just wondering, are the 3 clauses in this recommendation sufficient for that media release to show that the feeling of the councillors that we actually want an aquatic centre? Is that sufficient, or does it need an amendment to say that council wants this and is committing in principle to developing an aquatic centre?
I can assure you that it would certainly be my intention to make it known that we would want this for our municipality, but as we acknowledge there, it's unaffordable for us to go it alone, and it comes to the heart of what we've heard already about where all the aquatic centres are and where all the big pools are, and they're all north of the magic line of the electorates that are marginal. The majority of them are. Let's be brutally honest about that, and that says something about the lack of traction, I think, that we have during federal elections, because we have a safe seat in the south. So certainly I would be wanting to lobby our federal member for Franklin, Julie Collins, and anyone else who will, our senators and anyone else who will listen to us and put the message very clearly that our community, want this, but we need a model that could work for us as a municipality and as a council, without putting, as others have said, without putting our finances at risk and ending up then with something that is unaffordable in the long term and plunges us back into a situation that we don't want to be in financially. Councillor Bastone, did you have another question?
I do have another question. The quote is for a 50-metre pool, is that right?
No, 25.
It is for 25.
Yeah.
But it does have the deep water sport requirement. It has all these things on here, the warm water programs, the aquatic playground, the smaller pools, etc. is in that 40 million quote.
Yes.
Did they give us a base model? What happens if we go a 25-metre pool and a water therapy pool? Did we actually get anything that was like, for this much money you can have this, but if you want to spend another 10 million you get this as well, or is this all we got?
Mr. Sneed.
Through you, Mayor, I think this comes back to Councillor Midgley's earlier question about did we get given options? No. This is what we got for the money we had available. It hasn't been pared back in terms of, this is the gold plate and this is the base model. No, we didn't get the breakdown. We'd need to do further work in order to obtain that information.
Are we able to do that further work?
So that would come at a cost. This consultant's report was funded for us by the state government as part of a previous election commitment. So we would need to
and it
fund.
took all the money.
Yep.
Yep.
If there are no more speakers, I'll just make a very brief contribution because I feel like in answer to Councillor Cordova's question, I feel like I've already contributed some of what I was going to say. I think that we need to put it into context for the state government of the fact that at a cost of around, 40 million potentially for the build, and that's in today's dollars, that could blow out even further as we know in the future. But as Councillor Westwood indicated in her contribution at the start, we also would have to relocate quite a number of the existing sporting clubs that are up at the sports centre. So that would come at obviously a financial cost, but at some inconvenience to them as well. And if you recall the Kingborough Sports Precinct plan that we signed off on previously, it was quite a complicated set of dominoes almost to actually do all that. So we do need to be mindful of the fact that there is a broader plan here. But I did actually ask Mr. Breen earlier today whether he could give me some figures if I thought, well, what if by some miracle $20 million fell out of the federal and state governments? Wouldn't that be great? How would we fund the rest? We can only, with the borrowings that we already have, we can only borrow an additional $20 million as a council. The Auditor General would not allow us to borrow any more. It wouldn't be looked upon very well. And we would be paying $1 million a year in interest in order to fulfil our requirements of such a loan. And that would be then, once it's built, of course, we would then have operating losses on top of that. So we need to, I've watched the debate within the community, and I know there are very strong feelings about having a facility, and I, as someone who's had children growing up in the area and doing the drive up to the Aquatic Centre for Learn to Swim and also and kids' parties and all that, I really understand it. It's a very difficult one for us, and I've watched the debate, and it's interesting because there are also a lot of people who have said on social media, I don't want the pool, I would never use it, and I don't want to pay, an extra 5%, 7%, 10% in my rates every year for something that is only up the road. And I understand that, but it's not up the road for everyone. There are people, south in the Channel who don't have access to such a facility. And so I do think that regional approach, if we can get the project recognised as that, where it's something that people from the Channel and from the Huon Valley, because they've only got an outdoor pool in the Huon, and it's cold down there. It's very cold, so I think if we can, I think approaching this from a regional perspective and trying to get some assistance and recognition that this isn't just about, so I think it's important we do move the debate on from it's just about Kingston. It's not about a pool in Kingston, it's about a pool for the whole region. And so that we can, and I look forward to having a conversation with the Huon Valley Council and trying to open up that dialogue with them as well so that they can assist in lobbying, because there would be great benefits for their members as well if they wanted, for their residents, if they wanted to come up here. So, thank you everyone for your contributions. It's been a really valuable discussion, I think, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of media interest in this, but I do feel like we can give the message, as has been said, to the community that this is something that we would like to see. We need to find a way that we can move this debate forward, and so that we haven't done this study for no reason at all. I don't want to see it sitting on a shelf. Having said that, Councillor Westwood, did you want to sum up? No, thank you. All right. So we have the motion before us that was as printed at parts A and B with the addition of part C. It was moved by Councillor Westwood. It was seconded by Councillor Midgley. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried unanimously. Thank you, and thank you to the members of the public gallery who look like some of them might be leaving us at this point. We appreciate you being here for so long this evening. Thank you. We move on now to page 274, Leasing and Licensing Policy. Do I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Midgley, thank you. Councillor Fox. Councillor Midgley.
Thank you, Mayor. I note that this leasing and licensing policy came to us a month or so ago, and there was quite a bit of a debate and questions from councillors. And I note that the policy has been amended to address the request by councillors in relation to the following, which is noted on A, B, C and D. And thank you, staff, very much for listening to those conversations, and councillors for having those conversations previously. So I look forward to hearing what anybody thinks of this new policy, and I hope it satisfies us all.
Thank you, Councillor Midgley. Do I have any other contributions on this? We did give it a fairly vigorous debate last time, so if not, I will put the motion that Council's Leasing and Licensing Policy 3.21 as attached to the report be adopted for a further 5 years. It's moved by Councillor Midgley, seconded by Councillor Fox. All those in favour? The motion is carried unanimously. We move now to page 285, Financial Report for July 2021, with a recommendation on page 286. Do I have a mover and a seconder for that? Councillor Westwood, seconded Councillor Midgley. Thank you. Councillor Westwood.
Thank you, Mayor. This is the financial report for July 2021. Given it's the first month of the financial year, there's not a huge amount of discrepancy between what we approved as part of our budget a couple of months ago. So I only have one question, and that's in relation to Council's management of annual leave and time in lieu, regarding whether we have a policy that governs that and how it's treated in terms of the financial report as a liability.
Mr. Breen.
Yes, through you, Mayor. Yes, Council does have a policy in regards to annual leave and time off in lieu. Annual leave, we have a maximum of 8 weeks, and at that point we certainly start putting pressure on staff in regards to utilising some of their annual leave. As you're aware, during the COVID period it has been a bit more difficult than normal to get staff to take leave. There was some significant lot of leave taken over the last summer period, but once again, as we've gone into winter, it's been quite noticeable that that leave has diminished. In regards to toil, generally is not used a lot in the council, certainly not to any great extent. We aim to try and keep that under sort of 4 or 5 days. We actually have a discussion tomorrow at our MANEX meeting in regards to whether we could reduce that down to 3 days and then request staff take actual overtime rather than time off in lieu. It is used somewhat in regards to turf and the sports centre, who have sort of seasonal type activities. So for turf, they're quite busy over the summer period, but then they can utilise their toil for leave over the winter period. And the same with the sports centre, they're quite busy during the year, but certainly January, February are very quiet periods for them, so they tend to take a bit of leave during that period. Both these annual leave and toil are included in Council's provisions, so we provide for them, so there's a provision in the accounts, and each year we'll look at that provision, increase it by generally sort of 2 to 3% in our budgets to cover the additional costs associated with staffing salaries for that period.
Thank you. So whereabouts does the liability show up in the financial statements?
Yeah, through the Mayor, yes, essentially it's a provision for annual leave, so it's part of our provisions. It doesn't appear in the monthly reports, but in the end-of-year reports it's there.
Thank you.
Councillor Midgley.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to note a council resolution regarding the Spring Farm playground, noting that it's not in the capital expenditure. And I'm just wondering if that's just been missed or if it will be put in after the... I don't know.
I'll ask Mr. Smee. I
some
think
stage.
he is aware of that. Mr. Smee.
Thank you, Mayor. It's not in the capital program because it's not coming out of our capital expenditure. It's coming out of the proceeds of the sale of land, which then go into the public open space account, which we will then take out of there to go towards that project. So ultimately, yes, it will be reported as a capital project that we will capitalise, but at this stage, that's where it sits.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for that explanation.
Any further questions for Mr. Breen? You've got off lightly, I think, because it's early in the financial year and it's 9:15. Thank you very much. I'll then put the motion that Council endorses the financial report for the 31st of July 2021 as moved by Councillor Westwood, seconded by Councillor Midgley. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried unanimously. We now move to item 22, which was moved into open session. It is on page 310. It is in relation to a rates delegated authority, April to June 2021. There is a slight error in the papers in that there is no recommendation contained in that item on page 310. So it actually should read a recommendation that the report be noted. So that is the recommendation. It's moved by Councillor Wass, seconded by Councillor Fox. Councillor Wass.
Really got nothing to say, Mayor. It's an item for noting, and I believed that it should be out in the public domain so that people can see, in this case, what the rates, if you like, would be foregone or are foregone in relation to being owned by a government department.
Thank you. Councillor Bastogne.
Thank you, Mayor. My question is, Tipipui were invoiced for rates for April 21st, or April 2021 to June 2021, and that amount was 1,967. And then they're not doing it. They don't have to pay it because it's not leased any longer, or it's not leased to the South Channel Progress Association. It hasn't been leased to them since 1991, but have we been paying the rates on it each year until then?
I'm hoping Mr. Breen can answer that.
Yes, through you, Mayor. Essentially, it's noted under the property information that we get of the government system that there's a temporary Crown lease in regards to the Southern Channel Progress Association. We've been following up them with Tipipui for a number of years, trying to get an answer as to whether that's still in place. They finally come back to us and said, no, it's not. And as you quite rightly point out, it hasn't been in place for a number of years, but it is still noted on their records.
Thank you. Any further discussion? If not, I will put the motion that the report be noted. It was moved by Councillor Wass, seconded by Councillor Fox. All those in favour? Against? Motion is carried unanimously. Confirmation of items to be dealt with in closed session. I need a mover and a seconder that we move into closed session. Moved Councillor Westwood, seconded Councillor Bastogne. And the motion is that in accordance with Regulation 15 of the Local Government Meeting Procedure Regulations 2015, Council by absolute majority move into closed session to consider the following items: confirmation of minutes and applications for leave of absence. All those in favour? Against? Motion is carried unanimously.